I think I think they did revenue separately.
It is.
Right. Lori Charlton. It's September 17th, 2024, and this is the quarterly meeting of the Board of Finance. Call the meeting to order and ask that we all please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. To the members of the public who've dialed in or joined us via Zoom tonight, please know that you are muted and will not be heard by board members, and there will be no live public comment until called for during the meeting. We welcome public comment on voting items, which tonight are items 6 and 7 on the agenda. And I'll open up for public comment before the board begins deliberations on those items. If you are on Zoom, you can indicate via the chat function that you'd like to be heard now or at any time prior to public comment. Please plan to limit your comments to 3 minutes. Members of the public are always encouraged to send their comments and questions in writing to the board, bof@fairfieldct.org. If you do so, please remember to include your name and address as you would with live comment. Before we jump into the agenda, I also want to let members of the public know that next week, this board will have 2 capital planning meetings, one on Tuesday evening and one on Thursday, to discuss short and long-range capital requirements for the town and Fairfield Public Schools, including bonding requirements and projections of how that bonding is estimated to impact the town's budget over the next 20 years. The Tuesday meeting will cover townside projects. That is a regular meeting. The Thursday meeting is a special meeting. I'm not sure that's on the town website yet, but the agenda for next Thursday should be posted within the next couple days. All right, so with that, we'll move to item 3, to review the current status of the town's pension and OPEB funds. Backup for this item was revised. It's posted online as a separate document entitled BlackRock Town of Fairfield Quarterly Investment Report. The chairwoman of the pension board was not able to be here tonight, but pension board member Ken Brockfeld will be filling in for her to take us through the highlights.
Sure.
Welcome.
Thank you.
For being
Just
here.
the seat of honor? Yeah.
Yes.
Allergies. Okay. Good evening. I apologize. Carolyn sends her best wishes. She's teaching. And this is going to be a somewhat brief presentation, although I'll answer any questions you have, largely because we've just switched over to BlackRock as a new advisor. I just rejoined the board, so my knowledge isn't as deep as it should be or will be soon. But you did get a report that came in, unfortunately, a little bit late, but it came to all of us at the same time. I got it like at 30. I guess the bottom line is, I'm trying to look at the template that Carolyn uses here, is that the pension fund is in good shape and had a really good year. That probably isn't a huge surprise because we're all aware that the markets, have been very, very strong. And these are very, very long-term pools of money that are invested, I guess you could say, somewhat aggressively. The return, and again, this report is the fiscal year end, so as of June 30th, 9.9% was the return on the pension fund. And if you allow me to go back and forth a bit, 12.9 was the return in OPEB. And heading off a question that you might or might not ask, the OPEB is heavier in equities, U.S. equities in particular, and U.S. equities have been where it's at now for quite a while. Equities in general and U.S. equities in particular. And while both of these funds are super long-term funds, the OPEB is even more long-term in a sense because we're not taking any money out of there at this point. It might happen at some point in the near future, but whereas in the pension fund, there's obviously payments that go out, so we're set up, slightly less aggressively. That may or may not change in the future. Like I said, the big news in the pension world for us is the selection of a new OCIO manager. So we had Vanguard as our manager for feels like 7 or 8 years maybe. They went out of the business and we had to do a genuinely fast-tracked RFP search and choosing of a new advisor. We had a terrific independent person who helped us with that, a guy named Barkley. But I have to say that honestly, Carolyn did a job that is almost hard to believe. Getting this entire thing taken care of, shepherded through, and then the transition itself was a royal pain. Getting all the assets transferred over, and the big fight was also getting them to allow us to keep the private equity assets that we had from Vanguard, which were at a very attractive price point. And it was important to us that we could maintain that at BlackRock. We did that. So really tremendous appreciation to the work Carolyn did. So a lot of the stuff that I'm telling you tonight will be a lot more detailed at the next presentation because we're really getting our feet wet with BlackRock. Trying to see if there's a few other notes. By the way, please interrupt me if you have any questions. Carolyn asked me to point out that even though the transfer was difficult and a little rocky, there was no interruption of pension payments of any sort to any employees or former employees. And we also are moving over to Milliman as the new actuary. We've approved an experience study with them, which should be going on right now, I think, and we'll be getting the results there. experience study, for those who don't know, is largely about mortality. Even though you don't like to talk about it, one of the big decisions in terms of how you run these pensions is understanding the mortality of our pool of employees and what the expected payouts will be. Plus, so predicting or trying to predict inflation and wage growth. So that is on our agenda.
Lauren, could I ask,
Yes, please.
what is the experience study for? Is it for June 30th for this year end? Will it be done by then or?
Oh, no. Oh, this year.
Or-
Oh,
or is
I'm
it-
sorry. Yes, absolutely. I think it should be done this sooner.
It will affect this year's numbers
Yes.
for our audit.
Correct.
Okay.
I understand. Sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. And then the only other thing I'll add is,
And how often do we do that? Yes.
it's a good question, because I asked Carolyn that we probably waited too long. I think this was about 7 years, and I think the industry standard is 3 to 5. So call it 5 going forward. But we
Just typically 5, and it would be next, the experience that we have now will then get informed in the spring when the decisions are made to affect the numbers for next year. So it'd be fiscal 26 that it would go into effect.
And then the only other thing I think I have for you guys is that at the July meeting, we always discuss the discount rate, which currently is sitting at 6.9, and we didn't vote to make any changes to that. So 6.90 is the hurdle.
Good question.
Yeah, please.
Back to the experience study. When we do those, how long do they impact the mortality assumptions we use? Because it was my recollection that we were using just the standard mortality tables.
Yeah, we had a whole,
And we did that, I don't know, I recall that they changed a few years ago. So if we do this experience study and we go forward on a consistent path to do it every 5 years, then that will place the assumptions that we're using in the standard tables.
definitely.
Right, okay,
I think so.
okay.
We switched from the standard table to the municipal employee table.
Yeah, the municipal, right,
Right.
but that will be further adjusted based on the town of Fairfield. Right.
I do respect that.
Other questions from the board? Okay, that was easy.
It was painless.
Okay, so before we move on, Mr. Brockfeld was also going to present item 9 on the agenda, which it's an update on investment income and a projection analysis for the first fiscal year that we're in. So if it's okay with the board, I'd like to move that item up and hear it now so that we can be respectful of his time. So I'd like to make a motion to revise the agenda to hear item 9 next. Mr. Mottola seconds, all in favor? Kevin, are you okay? All right, it is unanimous 7-0 with Mr. Walsh and Mr. Testani here. Okay, so we'll move to item 9.
Thank you.
Sure, and the back, just for everyone's, the public's benefit, the backup for item 9 was posted supplementally, so it's a separate document. It's entitled Summary of Investment Income Projections Fiscal Year 25. I don't believe board members have a printed copy of that, so I don't know, David, do you have some?
You know what, actually,
Okay. If anybody has,
Which totals
yeah,
to 9525.
Yeah, it's 162.
I have one
Officially.
I don't need,
more.
I think,
One more sign.
I don't need.
and we can share.
You got enough.
Good enough?
Yeah.
I do.
I got two. You got a copy?
I got one, thank you.
Yeah, give this to Jim Walsh. Okay.
All right, so. Ken, I'll turn this over to you, I
Okay.
guess.
Well, again, please stop me with any questions. So I'm sure you guys are remembering, though, have there been board members since we had
Not since the budget,
presentation? Everybody was here, okay, I apologize. So just a very quick refresher, Bill identified, what we think was a very glaring, issue in terms of the way the town's, cash funds were being, custodied and invested. He asked me to come in and, work on it. We ended up working a consulting arrangement for me to do that. Originally it was for 6 months. It looks like it might be a little bit longer, but it's okay. I'm happy to help. In a nutshell, we lifted the funds that were at a local bank and a local brokerage firm and moved them, not all, but the overwhelming majority to Fidelity and Schwab, two enormous custody platform investment firms, and got them invested in what is arguably the safest possible investments you can use, which are treasury bills, treasury notes, and where we're using money market accounts, we're using treasury only money market funds. I tend to be extreme fuddy-duddy on this stuff. I think if you're trying to protect your money, you protect it. You don't go halfway. Normal money market funds are probably fine 99% of the time, but I don't think there's a reason to take any chances. How would you like me to?
So maybe, so this analysis that we have in front of us is a projection of investment income.
Correct.
For the year. So it's 9.5 million. And what was our budget for the
I
year?
think it was almost 9.1.
It was 9.
907 something.
So at this point, you're projecting that we are pretty close, pretty tight toward budget, but should hit budget.
I'd say yes, with a caveat, which would simply be that this is definitely accurate as of today, without question. These numbers come from Fidelity and Schwab plus our own. The only concern I would have, and I think we probably will hit the number, but is that among the things that they left us with in the previous places, which really I find very discouraging, were that a lot of the bonds were callable, a lot. So the coupons that we were earning, which looked quite nice, unfortunately are being taken away from us much quicker than we would want. So I'm sure you guys are all up on the news to some extent on what's going on with the Federal Reserve, and interest rates have dropped precipitously. Inflation appears to have come pretty much back to the target, 2% target, not all the way, but almost. And so, you know, the 5-year note, this is relevant. 5-year note when it started the project for the town, for Bill, was not quite 5%, but it was probably in the high 4s, 470, 480. I think it's around 3.5 today. It's come down a lot. So as these bonds get called, where they might have been earning 5%, 5.5%, whatever, 6%, well, not quite 6, but we're reinvesting them and we're making a conscious decision. And this is obviously always difficult because still the highest yields are in the shortest part of the yield curve. If you want the highest yield, just go into the money market fund. But if the Federal Reserve cuts rates as aggressively as some people are predicting, that'll be the first place that the yields will drop. You can easily see that 5 or whatever, now about 4.5, head down to 3.5, 3, 2.5, whatever. So we are locking in rates out the curve to the extent we can, meaning 1-year notes, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 is the longest that we've chosen to go. So ironically, we're taking money consciously out of a 4.5 and we're buying a 3.5. We're doing it for a reason, because we want to lock that 3.5 in before it becomes 2. It's a long answer to say that this can't be an ironclad prediction, because if calls happen more aggressively than we hope and rates drop more aggressively than we think they might, you know, we could see less of the investment income. It's just not an exact science, but I think it's a reasonable, it's certainly a good estimate, without question.
Thank you. Mr. Stark?
Why is the Fidelity projection so low?
My simple answer is, I don't know, but the answer that I'm almost 100% sure is the case is simply well, I'll give you a good answer. We chose to move the taxable municipal bonds from, when we moved them out of Firm X, we just moved the taxable munis to Fidelity, and we moved everything else to Charles Schwab, and there wasn't really any rhyme or reason to that. We just had to split them, so we just did it.
I think Kevin might be looking at the wrong column. They're pretty, they higher, the first two columns. Not the,
No, he's asking why it's lumpy.
oh, sorry.
Which, so I think I'm gonna get
It's not
to a
cash
reasonable answer.
basis.
Oh, sorry.
Is that what explains? That's what cash basis, like are you just simply predicting the time?
No, it's just that the taxable municipal bonds that we inherited,
Yeah.
that we have not sold, we've moved over in kind, so they're still there. The maturities, these bonds pay semi-annually, so the maturities that we inherited are just random. So, you know what I'm
So the
saying,
lumpiness is more to
It's just random.
maturities.
specifically to maturity, right? So it's just,
They both largely have the same, it's a timing.
it doesn't mean he means lumpy with.
Lumpy, I thought you meant,
Yeah.
I thought, I heard low.
Yeah, no, yeah, he's right, so you have 930 one month, 135 the next, 167. It all comes out in the wash at the end of.
So, I mean, without the numbers behind this, I guess it's hard, but you're like unable to mark up a muni in price until the day it matures, and then suddenly you recognize a lot of gain. Is that, I mean, because I would just think this would be a very smooth looking cash flow.
Well, again, you're looking at the interest payments.
Yeah,
So again, let's just say hypothetically, when they started, they bought 20% of the bonds on January 1st, and then they didn't buy any on February 1st, and on March they bought 30%.
that tells me it's cash basis then, right?
Yeah.
Because if you were accruing,
Correct.
you would factor in the dirty price, which is like the price including unpaid coupon.
But we budgeted on a cash basis this year.
Yeah.
Yeah, the board might recall, we used to budget
The
in
answer is just
unrealized
cash
gain or
basis,
loss.
yeah.
Oh, I see, okay.
It totally makes sense then.
Right,
Okay.
right. And you see at the bottom there is Frank, who prepared this. We're not including the gains or losses on the fair market adjustment at the end of the year. I mean, right now, knock on wood, there's a fair amount of gain because interest rates are dropping. So the bonds are marked up in terms of the price. But again, between now and the end of the fiscal year. Action. And I don't think you put that into the budget line this year.
We did not.
They did not.
Mr. Curley?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I appreciate that being still wet on this. It's
Very.
Yeah, we're at the end of the day today. So very firm, but, is it safe to interpret that to mean that the July and August numbers are actuals and then it's a forecast from there?
Yes.
Okay. So just focusing on the cash and treasury data for a moment, 185 became 86 and then it kind of leveled up thereafter. Is that 86 a function of the short-term interest rates coming down? Is there a risk to the 100,000 a month going forward?
Risk is the right word, but I wouldn't take those numbers. I should have said that. That's a placeholder for sure.
Yeah.
So we still have, I can let David and Bill speak to this. We still have, substantial amount of money in M&T Bank that fluctuates a lot. Right? Tax revenues come in and then payroll goes out, et cetera. But we don't have a mechanism, at least at this time, to run the day-to-day check writing, et cetera, out of Fidelity or Schwab. So that number is a placeholder for the income we're still earning in M&T. And we also have, for whatever reason, the money market funds weren't picked up in these interest rates. So the money market funds at Fidelity and Schwab, the treasury only money markets, which fluctuate as well, right? So that number is definitely.
That's in the 100,000.
It's in there, yes.
So to me, it seems that that treasury, that cash treasury fund balance, that $100,000 placeholder is probably the most risky number from a forecast standpoint than anything else on this.
Because it's the most sensitive to Federal Reserve.
Yeah.
Yeah, probably true.
And the annual projection is 9.5 versus a budget of roughly 9.1, so we've got 400,000 cushion for that. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So, thank you, Mr. Curley. Other questions from the board?
Well, I just add a little bit of color. Just elaborating on Ken's, most of the, calls that have occurred have been in the Schwab account, since the beginning of the fiscal year. We have had roughly 15 million.
50 or 15?
15.
15.
Most of them were in the low to mid fives. As recently as today, 1 million at 5.65. So as an example, that is at most gonna get purchase, if you went short term, around 4%, 5-year, which we probably will replace it with, about around 3.4, 3.41. It's bouncing back and forth and probably rapidly about to slide. Amounts range, usually the ones that have been getting called have been 750,000, but 2 million, 1.7, 2.5, 2.25. I mean, these calls have occurred, 1 to 2, a week at times. It's slowed over the last 10 days. I did walk through prior to this meeting this afternoon with our rep at bond desk at Schwab, just to get a sense of what was coming. It's hypotheticals, but if you look at what the yield is, you can pretty much tell that most of them are, clearly they're gonna get called soon. Some of them, it's a timing, they have a window, so they every 3 months, or some of them are every month. So if they didn't do it in August, we know 3 months later that they're likely to do it. A few things that are exposed are, 5, 4.2, 5.25, 5.15, those ranges. And the ones I just named are, 2 million, one of them's another 2, another 1 million, another 2 million. So those are probably all exposed to most likely seeing 3 to 3.5, because you have to assume that the rates are gonna dip further, post any Fed adjustments and 5-year dropping further. So, one of the things in this number, yes, that treasury cash piece is probably the most exposed, and that once rates drop, that fund's probably gonna drop pretty considerably. It's held its own, only dropping about 10 basis points at most recently. But the other numbers that you're seeing, particularly in the Schwab side, will drop some when that occurs. So this is a snapshot.
They wouldn't have, if they can pretty confidently predict that's gonna happen, why wouldn't that have been built into this projection?
This is taking all of the bonds that we have and a schedule of interest payments running through June 30th, telling us right now, based on what we have in the account, what it would be, because they can't.
And I understand that, but it just seems that based on what you just said, we could get a clearer picture of how much risk is in that number, and that hasn't been provided to us.
So when projecting this, so first, this is to some degree, this is a quarterly meeting where we normally look at per quarter. We were asked to put together something at an earlier stage. We're only 2 months into the fiscal, and we are in a very volatile time. So we tried to put together a presentation with a sense of where we are and add some elements of conservatism. So when you go to the cash treasury funds, that assumes 5%, 25 million would get you to 1.25. So it took the 2 realistic numbers that we had and added, and we broke it out as assuming 100,000 across. If we were to take the amount that we keep liquid and then actually project out that number actually probably will ultimately be a little bit higher, but these other numbers will actually be a little bit lower.
Okay, if I could just maybe then request 2 things. I have a question I don't want to forget, but maybe going forward, I think what would be helpful, it's because this whole issue with the callable bonds, I don't remember Janney talking to us about this at all, and maybe we should have asked, but this was always presented as, we've got this, fixed income stream and it looks like they chased a little bit of extra yield and we ended up with these callable bonds that now are being called, and so we're gonna get hurt by that. But, I mean, if, Schwab, it's on the Schwab side that those holdings, yeah, I mean, if they have a projection of what they think is gonna happen with what bonds are gonna get called and when, seems like we could do at least a rudimentary, projection of the risk next time around. So I would be interested to know that. And then I think the other thing that we spent a little bit of time talking about during the budget was what our average cash balances were. Because that obviously had the big impact. So I see this cash/treasury funds projection, and I get it's rough. I know that there's a lot of moving parts, but as we go forward, just the gross amount of cash that we had in the budget buildup, it would be interesting to see how that compares to what's in the bank and what we're earning interest on, in that, in the cash treasury fund column going forward, so that we can understand, what this looks like. But if I heard what you said correctly, you think there may be some downside on the Schwab side and some upside in the treasury fund? Okay. And right now so that we can conclude that we're close to budget, but we shouldn't expect any significant upside or any upside in this number versus budget.
This statement puts it at an estimate of 9.5. I would say we're either direction, very close to try to that 9.1. So, and yeah.
No, I have a question, actually, an accounting question. It's on my area. There is gonna be a mark-to-market adjustment from a legal retaining element, if that's a required document that has to be reported on our.
Right, but
our books.
it's,
May not be in the budget.
we didn't, because it's not cash,
Right,
we didn't include it in the budget.
okay, so at the end of the year, if it's X, it won't
Yeah,
have any.
it'll go in the CAFR, but it won't, since we can't spend the money.
Got it.
So we, heard from our auditor that, we used to budget for unrealized gain or loss, but that's actually a relatively unusual thing to do, and it kind of doesn't make sense from
No,
a budget basis of
makes
accounting.
sense. I think we can, whatever we do to answer the question, which is a great question, is gonna be very rough and tumble, because, there's no guarantee that
Right.
bonds that are callable get called, right? There's reasons sometimes that even though a bond is in the money, so to speak, it doesn't get called.
Right.
And we also don't know what the replacement income will be with any
Right.
forecast. But having said that, we can take a stab at it.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, we can take some of these and we can put 3 or 3.5
Just to know, I mean, if
money.
we get to the point where we look like we have $1 million of risk or something, I mean, that's kind of the point of these projections, just sort of anticipate what it's like. Okay.
We're managing our liquid amount, which usually was pretty significant. We're trying to tighten some of that up, and we don't need it to necessarily be fully exposed interest rate wise or fully liquid. We try to put that into treasuries, but even at that, if it's something that we know we might not need to spend for 12 months, it's not going in a 5-year bond, but it may go into I think that's part of the laddering strategy that Ken's been working.
Other questions? No other questions?
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Ken.
No, thank you.
Appreciate you being here.
My pleasure.
All right. So with that, we will move on to item 4 on the agenda, which is to review the Board of Ed fiscal year 24 year-end financial position. The backup for this item begins on page 31 of the posted meeting materials. Courtney Laborious is here. Hi, Courtney, which is the CFO for Fairfield Public Schools, Superintendent Mike Testani, Board Member Jeff Peterson, welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, you two guys.
Hey, thank you for having us here. The Fairfield Public Schools closed the fiscal 2024 year with a zero balance. Actually, you guys and all of our allocated funding. Thank you to the board's leadership and the support of the town, we were able to make strategic transfers, and we had savings in key areas that ensured that resources were deployed to address immediate as well as long-term educational operational needs. The adopted budget was $210.16 million, with transfers made throughout the year to reallocate savings. And the savings were mainly, as we talked about throughout the year, transportation, utilities, and insurance. And these savings were redirected to cover needs while reducing future demands through approved multi-year planning with the board. So what were we funding? We were funding the gap that we had in personnel and special education, as well as some critical maintenance projects that are on a multi-year waterfall plan. The final pre-audit financial report, again, reflects a zero balance. And let's see, so instead of going through the talking points, I'll direct you to the handout that you had at the table. I did put the base numbering because I know sometimes it's hard to follow numbers that are or are not in the packet. So the first is just outlining a lot of the things that we talked about with you throughout the year. The changes from our preliminary Q4 report were mainly that we had less money that we needed to transfer into our personnel accounts because we had additional revenues that we realized through the reservations system and through the change in fees that we had in the reservations, as well as some management tools that were put into place to reduce the need for substitutes. Meaning we were still meeting the needs of the classroom, but just deploying subs more effectively at year end, and that brought down our need personnel line. So ultimately, we had to transfer $353,000, I believe it was, into the personnel line, and $815,000 to our special education line. That was the result of, we've been talking about the the age up mandated legislation that aged our students' services up to the year in which they turned 24 as opposed to the start of the year. And that cost us about $600,000 here. It's budgeted for this year because we knew about it when we built the budget last year. And in addition, there was a cap on the excess cost, which is state reimbursement that comes to us from the state from a formula, and the amount was capped and we received less than we had anticipated in the budget. So that led to a gap of $800,000 in pupil personnel services. And that was basically funded with surpluses in utilities and transportation. If you turn to page 3 of 57, there's a summary of the packet. And we like to monitor it as we present each quarter sort of side by side, so you can see how the projection changed and how we closed out the year. So with Q4, you can see we're closing with zero balance, and where you see a negative, that's where we had to ask the board to transfer money in to cover needs, and a positive means that we had funds to give up to cover those needs. The bottom is unencumbered balance. As you can see, as you go throughout the year, the unencumbered balance reduces down to zero. We did, and I think that's going to be part of Adam's presentation a little bit later tonight, roll at year end about $1.6 million in encumbrances from bills that we expect to receive, and we've paid more than 3/4 of that at this point, which is much lower than we had in the past. So our staff did a good job of getting all the bills paid before they left the end of the school year. The next page is just a detailed report showing where we close the fiscal year, how the board likes to do it with categories. That's page 4 of 57 it starts on. Each of those categories is a major classification. So personnel, fixed charges, pupil personnel expense. And if you look, for example, all the way over to the right on line 20, where I was mentioning the $815,000 need in pupil personnel, it was actually higher in sped expenses, but it was offset by savings that we had in special education transportation due to the driver shortages that we have been thinking about sort of came to fruition basically as we had projected, unfortunately, but fortunately that we were able to cover the balance there. And so on and so forth. So as I mentioned in personnel, you can see up above in the line, we had a need of $368,000 on line 10. Again, that was covered with additional funds balances that we had in fixed charges. We were able at year end to also accomplish a few purchases in the capital line. So if you go down to page 5 of 57, line 52, you can see that there was a transfer into capital of $157,000. That enabled us to purchase a few kilns. We don't budget for the kilns, but we have a multi-year replacement. So as funds become available, the next one on the schedule, we purchased for this year through the board voting on those transfers, in addition to additional Promethean boards that we were able to purchase at year end against a multi-year schedule that just reduces the future needs. I'll pause there and see if through the chair, if there are any questions.
Thank you.
Yes.
Mr. Walsh.
So as you got to year end,
Uh-huh.
you said that you purchased, how much money did you realize you had in your set?
So, depends on what you mean by year end. So internal transfers, we had about $1 million in utilities, which we had been projecting, but utilities, there's a bit of a lag and then bills get realized. So we had a plan to spend out that utility funds on multi-year projects, which is something that the board reviews on what they call the maintenance waterfall. And that looks at a 5-year plan for all the maintenance projects that we're hopefully to achieve. Of that, internal transfers were done and they accomplished, I think, about $1 million worth of work that was planned for if we had a surplus available in utilities, which we did.
Is that the only area you had a surplus in, was the $1 million in utility?
No, we also had funds, if you look at sort of page 3 of 57, you can see where we ended in fixed charges, which is all of our insurances, we had $608,000. That went to cover the need that we had in personnel as a result of increased enrollments at elementary, as well as, the other increased personnel that we talked about through the budget process. So in addition, we had, let's see.
Can I,
Yep.
and Mr. Walsh, I just want to make sure, I think your question was, and I think it's an important one. So not so much where you had, savings and fixed charges, but you had increased special ed costs, right? Those were some offsets. I think, what was
What did we do?
the net at the end, right? You covered any overages.
Yeah.
And then you had $1 million that went toward this maintenance waterfall. Is that the answer?
Yes, that's the answer.
Okay.
And the Promethean boards that we purchased, as well as the kilns, so.
Okay. So that in total was, I'm sorry, Jem, I wanted to make sure,
Yeah, I got some other questions about the
Yes.
same thing.
is that so it's $1 million for the maintenance waterfall and those, what are they called?
Promethean
Promethean boards is
yeah,
the 127
Uh-huh.
and the kilns was what?
The kilns and the Promethean are in that 127, so about
Okay.
26 of it was the 4 kilns, the balance being Promethean boards. And then, yes, in addition, the maintenance projects.
So
for
1.1, 1.2 million roughly.
About 1.2, yep.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay, so the fixed charges of the 608, 238 you're talking about, that's the insurance they kind of knew you were gonna have.
That's correct, yep.
That amount didn't change, right? Roughly the same amount?
It's roughly the same, yep.
Yeah, okay.
Uh-huh.
Okay, and did that go into this 1 million two or whatever you just talked about, or is that you were using that because you know you had negative offsets?
Yeah, typically like the fixed charges we use to cover the personnel line, the personnel line was higher, you'll see. So we were holding that aside until year end to make sure that the personnel came down as we were hoping, and it did. So we used the fixed charges to pay for the personnel needs, as well as some of that not capital, but we call the maintenance waterfall.
Personnel charges came down to a number that allowed more money on this maintenance waterfall plus the 127 capital expense, 128,000.
Yeah, I mean, I would just qualify that in saying, as part of a typical year, the way the school budget works. You do transfers within a major category. So the major category being maintenance, operations, and transportation. Within that category includes the utility budget. So as we have utility savings, we budget very conservatively for a lot of the maintenance projects, very low. And some years are good years for utilities and some years are not as good, meaning as warm or the rates exceed what we had projected. So in this year, it was a good year. Within that major category, we were able to accomplish planned projects that we had anticipated.
Can you get us a copy of the maintenance waterfall and show what was covered and what is still there?
Sure, I'd be happy to, yep.
Are you adding stuff to that? And no, how does this work?
No, so it's an ongoing list that Mr. Papa George keeps with superintendent and the board.
It's obviously always,
About a year ago.
it's always obviously
Yeah.
unexpected.
Phase 1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
Boiler goes,
Yeah.
things not, maintenance on the athletic field needs to be pushed up because of excessive use, you know. The athletic budget, we just went through this at our last board meeting. You know, you're going through uniforms quicker, you're going through equipment quicker.
Yeah, broken doors,
Yeah.
paving, trees, there's a
And
lot
I'd
more.
just like to say, we never exhaust that list.
Yeah.
That's an expansive list, prioritized list, and we never get to the bottom.
We had an extensive amount of tree removal, at McKinley School, for example, this year, and a couple of the other schools to make it safer for cars that are parked. Remove it off the face of the buildings for safety concerns, and security around the buildings, so that it's,
Emergency chiller that happened at year end, which, would have had to come from this year's budget, but we were able to purchase part of it at year end, $160,000 of the estimated $350,000 need for that.
which I'm sure you'll be
Is an
discussing
unbudgeted
later
need,
tonight.
What's this chiller?
McKinley, one of the chillers at McKinley went.
Chiller is like a refrigeration device in the
It's
kitchen.
it's an air conditioning device for the building.
On the roof,
They
yeah.
have two chillers there to cool the building.
In this maintenance waterfall I think it was last year's expenditure, maybe it was the year before, refresh my memory about the Sturgis Field.
That was last year, that we did Sturgis and Holland Hills Fields as a way, because Anthony didn't have any additional funds. Which has been a great help because it's also relieved some of the flooding issues and to the softball field at Sturgis as well.
Was that on the maintenance waterfall last year? You decided to make that.
It was not on the waterfall, it was a concern that was raised by the athletic director. There was some safety hazards on the field. And before someone blew out a knee with some of the divots and things on the field, we thought it would be prudent that we prohibit a potential lawsuit and liability by taking care of the field with the surplus funds.
You decide like between a regular turf field versus both with grass or artificial turf.
Our understanding is that there's no way to turf Sturgis, at least for whatever purposes that the land was donated, so we were left with grading, drainage and sod in the field.
I would assure you that we are, like, turfing fields is
Yeah.
a major priority of the board and looking for ways to make that happen where possible.
So possibly,
I don't want to speak to this situation, but
We would love to do it.
yeah, we're looking to make more turf available.
okay, thank you.
And the waterfall was reviewed at that June 25th meeting and then again revisited, so we'll send you the latest copy of that as part of it.
My last question in this regard, is there anything else that you haven't spoken about tonight? Or things were purchased for the upcoming budget year that were purchased with money from this year's, talking about this budget,
There's
fiscal year 24 budget?
There's one more item.
Okay.
Yep, that it was into reading.
Yeah, our new reading program,
reading
we
program.
had a payment we made ahead of time, with the extra money that will toward
25,000.
the remaining balance that we owe the company.
Why did you do that?
It's a multi-year plan that we have, so the legislation was
It's non-recurring,
Yeah,
item, so we might as well pay it off so that we're a little bit ahead of the game.
So, yeah, it's only, it was a 3-year or 4-year, or a 4-year expense, that we would have to build the budget for each year. So it saves us against a future non-recurring expense.
All right, so you're $25,000 ahead in the fiscal year 25 budget because of that expenditure, maybe $24.
We still have a balance, but we are $25,000 less.
Well, let's say the 26 budget, because there's still one more year. So we're still gonna use the amount that we dedicated in the 25 budget. So we'll be happier for the town to the tune of 25,000 when we propose our 26 budget.
So you are still planning on making the whole fiscal year 25.
Correct.
Your thought is you'll be $25,000 ahead.
On the final payment, correct.
Yeah, and the 26 budget.
That changes, can you let us know?
Yes.
Thank you. Any other questions from the board? All right, thank you.
So I know Adam will be doing the procurement.
Yeah.
He said he'd call us if he needs us, if that's okay.
Okay, appreciate that.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
All right, so we will move to item 5 to review the town fiscal year 24 year-end financial position. Backup for this item begins on page 88 of the posted meeting materials. I was looking around because I didn't see you at first, and I said, I couldn't imagine doing this without you here. All right, so we have Caitlin Bossy, the town controller, and Frank Van Neri, the budget director. Welcome again for the public. This item begins on page 88 of the posted meeting materials, and the first page is entitled Projected Net Estimated Operational Variance for the period ended June 30th, 2024. All right, Caitlin, turn it over to you.
Take it away. We have some good news, I guess. So some of it is going to be a familiar story that we've been talking about. But looking at the subtotal for the revenue, we are up from Q3 about $3 million. Primarily due to a couple of things. The tax sale did occur. So that increased our basically our prior and interest dollar amounts that occurred late June. So that accounted for about $2.6 million coming in for this year. The other large ones, and then we can kind of go back. State revenue came in, and these are actuals, came in, and before there was 3 lines that came in more than we had budgeted, for almost another 700,000 there. So those two kind of make up for the large variance from Q3 to Q4. Starting at the top, again, really due to the tax sale. First tax sale auction occurred, I think we've talked about it a couple times, on June 18th. It was a process that started with 14 properties and ended up with a full recovery of tax debts on 13 of the 14. Basically, they recovered about 2.5 million in back taxes for the town. So we have the details of that. I talked about it a couple times. So that really is the large variance. In addition to our actual collection rate, we had a budgeted collection rate of 98.93 and the actual came in at 99.07. So they were slightly favorable on the current as well as the prior interest. So that accounts really for almost 2 million of our $3 million favorable variance from Q3 to Q4. Investment income, you guys talked about it with Ken. We hit the 5 million mark where we had been projecting since Q2. So that came in basically where we thought it was going to come in. So not much favorability from Q3 to Q4, but again, that is $5 million of our overall favorable variance. So that really drove our favorable variance on the revenue side this year. Thirdly, conveyance, slight increase really from Q3 to Q4. Really it was just the real estate market in the spring. So she was favorable to budget by about $130,000 this year. Building permits, fire marshal fees, again, we weren't really projecting much of a variance from Q3 to Q4. There was a slight variance. And building permits was basically, I think it was a apartment coming in and one large single-family home that came in, which really got them right over the budget amount for the permit fees. Fire marshal fees, again, a couple of larger things landed for the universities, 50 grand over budget, very slight. Park and rec revenue, again, we were projecting about 418, came in at about 550. Really, and you're gonna hear this theme kind of throughout the night, the warm weather, really the beach parking was a large part of that variance from Q3 to Q4 and golf. So those two things and Burr Mansion, the rental. They had a few more events, if there was open dates, there was a few more events that came in through June 30th. Not lastly, state revenue, like I said, there was 3 items that came in Q4. 300,000 of this variance was ECS grant, was $290,000 more than budgeted. And the LoSiP came in 200,000 more than was budgeted, and we got about another 100 or so in the municipal revenue share. So again, those are things that kind of come in. We have no way of knowing that they're going to be over budget, but they came in the last quarter, so that really threw our state revenue about 685 more favorable than where we thought it was coming in. Lastly, the other slight, actually unfavorable variance. A lot of small variances you guys could see on the comments, both ways, some higher, some lower. So, $100,000 swing there actually to the negative. Basically for the revenue, we were favorable, like I said, from Q3 to Q4 of about 3 million. But overall, our revenue is over budget by the 11,395,000. So I'm thinking at a future meeting, we're going to talk about, we have to, as you guys know, the last couple of years, we've been having to, you can't spend that revenue until you increase your budget on both sides. So we'll come back and do the increases, which has to go to all 3 boards to be able to then transfer that. Or we want to transfer to a debt service, and we look at fund balance and what's going to fall to maintain our percentages. But that's basically revenue.
Okay, any questions on revenue from the board? Mr. Walsh?
I would say, conveyance taxes, no matter what we do, always seems to be positive. I really think we gotta come up with a better way of estimating that. I understand that it was a spring market for this 4th quarter, but it happens every 4th quarter. It's spring market hits every 4th quarter. And we're just off on that number consistently. We're down, relying on knowing the town clerk who's not, I don't know, it's the best person to be to come up with those conveyance tax estimates. Was the number completely flopped by almost $300,000 in 1 quarter. And interest rates have pretty much stayed the same, slight dip in interest rates on the residential real estate, slight, but it's not driving it. What's driving it is the town and people wanting to live here and the low inventories. And that's not changing anytime soon. So I think we've got to look at that number hard and fast when we do the next budget season.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Any other questions on revenue? Okay. Expenses.
Okay, expenses. Slight favorability from Q3 to Q4 as well. I'll just start down the list. Vacancies, slightly more favorable than we had been projecting. We had projecting around the 600 all year. It came in the actual 715. So $100,000 difference. Not a big swing. Park and rec expense, again, higher revenue, but actually the expenses went down, got less unfavorable than Q3. Had some savings in some maintenance lines, really, for the most part. So there was $100,000 swing to the good there. The 500,000 for the UI legal transfer, you guys know about. The salary transfer was done in Q3 as well. The FCRD contribution shortfall, we had talked about that last quarter. We're expecting a negative hit of about 310. It came in slightly under that. So the additional contribution that we had to make to the FCRD to make it whole was 229. Again, a small swing there. The last one that actually really caused the largest swing on the expense side is the other category. Q3 had some smaller expenses coming in at about $107,000. The actual was about closer to 914. So there was a couple departments that, some of which maybe we would have known, some of which we didn't know. The larger ones that gave back kind of some favorability, the DPW, and we're going to talk about those in a minute with some reappropriations. Solid waste and recycling had a large favorable variance. So I had reached out to John Cattell, really in the fees and pros line. So I asked him, really what was driving that. It was the scale weighing for the most part. So the budget was based on an estimated tonnage of 33,000 tons. The actual amount of tonnage came in at about 31. So given the math of that, that equated to about $175,000 favorability. That was largely due to one hauler started taking commercial tonnage directly to the burn plant directly. So that did not pass through our transfer station. So hence the 2,000 ton reduction there. And there was a decrease in the recycling rates that we had to pay. So that accounted for about $150,000 as well. So the revenue, however, I was like, well, the revenue and the expense kind of follow each other. The revenue was based on a 3-year average. So that was closer to budget. But this really drove, it was about a $500,000 swing recycling. Other departments that had large favorability that you can't really kind of gauge, heart and hypertension, we're self-insured. So you never really know. That was about $200,000 favorable. The fire department came in under budget, about $200,000 as well. Private school buses, $153,000, and hydrant and water usage was about $100,000. So we had some large favorable balances on a few budgets that we just did not see coming. And we're gonna kind of meld into the next agenda item, which is the town reappropriations, but we pause on the expense if there's any questions.
Okay. And just to be clear, so just to be clear, these numbers are pre-audit,
Yes.
but you're considering them essentially final. But remind us what adjustments happen. So when we look at this estimated increase in fund balance here, what adjustments happen as a result of the audit that are going to change that number?
There's two major ones. Leases. I'm still looking at leases to see if there's any new leases or leases that kind of stopped. The software-based IT do not hit the ledger. That's a government-wide new GASB requirement. The other, I don't want to say large variances, but the stuff that is the encumbrances from last year that roll forward, and if departments don't use those funds, they kind of come in as a revenue source. So I'm looking at those POs from last year too, to see how much was closed without being paid.
So these are lapsed encumbrances,
Yeah,
basically?
and they get expensed last year, as you know, because we expense the encumbrances when they happen. So if they are not paid, then they're closed without being paid, that's actually, it comes in as revenue here. So that adjusts my number a little bit. So it tweaks it. And also one other note that I wanted to kind of say on the operational variance piece. The next agenda item, like I said, is reappropriations, and this does take into consideration these reappropriations getting approved. So if they don't get approved, this 13,290 actually goes up. So just keep that in mind.
Okay, so you said pending items before these numbers are final are leases, software, lapsed encumbrances. Any idea, would that result in an increase or decrease in the overall surplus?
Leases could be I think there's only one or two, but I'm not sure which way they go because I have to take them over the life of the lease and look at the fair market value of them. So I want to say last year, I think there was a lease that was discontinued, which actually was a negative number. It was a cell tower lease. So I don't know,
Okay,
if there's any new ones. There's a couple that were waiting on improvements at the police station. I'm not even sure if they're being used yet. So it shouldn't be huge, but
okay. So you don't think that shouldn't change these numbers materially?
it could swing a little bit, but.
Great. Thank you for that. Mr. Walsh?
Caitlin, what changed between third quarter and fourth quarter in regards to vacancy insurance to drive that up by $115,000 in one quarter? What were the vacancies insured that were additional?
Well, it's always a crapshoot, right? So to know who's coming, like we talked about last quarter. I do have a list so I reached out to all the departments that kind of left some money on the table, so to speak, in the full-time salary line. The largest one is, police officers. The big departments are hard to do because it creates a ladder effect with the police, DPW, ops. You have someone leave and then someone moves up and then someone can move over and then they leave, the last position. So there's always some churn there. I'll run down the list of some of the feedback that I got. The assistant town clerk was vacant for 6 months. Some larger ones were, conservation open space manager was open for 6 months. Purchasing had a buyer open for 1.5 months and a senior buyer open for 4 months. Again, someone had moved up and it just creates a ladder effect there. In the assessor, there was assessor 1 position open for 4 months and an admin position open for 5 months. Really some of the churn probably from Q3 to Q4 was any retirements that happened, like in the police department or DPW. But then again, you have, so it's just hard to get a handle on it. There was an inspector open in the building department for 4.5 months. Nurses are tricky. Nurses take days off without pay. And it's very random. And then they have substitutes that have to come in. So that's kind of a whole nother ball of wax. Sam's sent me the list of maybe 6 or 7 nurses and what days they took out without pay. And then the substitute that has to come in and replace them, and they have different rates. You have a sanitarian open for a month. There was a coordinator down in Julie's realm, 2 months. 2 library associate positions at the library for 7 months total. Park and Rec had some turnover in the later part of the year. Rec coordinator for 1.5 months and the aquatic coordinator for 2 months. And in the Parks Department, the superintendent left in April. So that was open for 2 months and a laborer was open for 2 months.
The ones that you said were there for 6, 7, even 5 months, those were built into the vacancy churn for Q1 to Q3. So those are not new. It's more of the retirement stuff. Sounds like the police stuff and some of the stuff from the nurses who may be trying to blow through days before the year end. It's heavily weighted towards fourth quarter.
Well, I don't know why they took these, but they did.
There was just a lot more in the fourth quarter.
The nurses, I would have to look at the days that he sent me. I could. But.
Okay. I think you've answered my question. There's nothing clear.
It's a hard.
That happened in the fourth.
No.
Okay.
I was just gonna say, Caitlin will ask me for my input on something like the vacancies chart, and these are estimates up until the end of the year, so.
The Parks and Rec number kind of any question, because normally those two go hand in hand, meaning increases in both areas, meaning that if there's increased revenue, there's increased expenses. But you think that, you're saying that the Parks and Rec number went down despite the increase of $140,000 in income, primarily because they decided not to do maintenance?
Well, no. So if you look at the utilities for the Penfield billing came back 13 favorable. If we look at some favorable lines, Yeah, maintenance and repair of buildings and grounds in Smith Ridge gave back 11. What was that? Less tree work in the fees and pros under Smith Ridge of 30. So there was some that we didn't realize was not gonna happen in Q4. So their unfavorability got better, so to speak.
Pay attention to the Board of Ed side of this thing and spend that money and doing the tree work and stuff like that.
Well, they were already over, they're gonna be on your next list because they were over with their seasonal, so
Okay.
they're over budget in total, so this just kind of helped their overage.
And the solid waste and recycling, we made some good points about the $175,000 scale weight. Is that something that happened during the, or that one hauler, commercial hauler, brought stuff directly to the, burn plant? Does it only happen during the fourth quarter, or was that happening all year?
I don't know, I could ask John Cattell
We can find out.
for the date of that.
If it happened all year, we probably should have been about it, yes. And the rest of it you thought, which was about a total of $500,000 in the solid waste and recycling, was a decrease in recycling fees. Is that
So the tip fee for recycling dropped, it changes every quarter.
fair?
My notes from John, the high was 94 dollars a ton, it went down to a low of 63.
Okay.
So that changes quarterly, so that was accountable for some of that favorability as well.
And overall, I forgot to ask Frank a question. Frank, in regards to budgeting, with the fact that we took all this money in from this tax sale, are we gonna have to be breaking down on our budgetary purpose, our numbers for like prior year interest and things like that?
No, because there was a list of properties that the tax collector had, and I believe they only did a tax sale for the oldest properties that were delinquent. And so this year's budget included a budgeted number for another tax sale that would occur in FY 25, and so those budget assumption in that tax sale.
Okay.
So the numbers for prior year taxes included, a decrease from people are paying more frequently, the collection rates are higher, so it incorporates that. But the revenue from the tax sale also drives that number up. So it accounted for the dynamics in that.
So there's gonna be another tax sale in this year's budget, correct?
That was the assumption that I had included in the FY 25
That's
budget.
still the plan?
To my understanding, yeah.
Okay. The plan to have a tax sale every single year from now on?
Do we stop accruing interest? Is there like a
Yeah,
finite
15 years.
time that
There
if
is, yes.
Yeah.
15 years?
you have to do the tax sale, because otherwise it
Right.
gets.
Yeah, you're
Otherwise-
losing.
You would ask, I mean, okay. So you were what, 12-year delinquent? And we accrue at 18%. And the plan is to do another one, but ultimately the plan would be to, if people need help, after 3 years, we should be very aggressive getting them help. Some of these people seem to have not understood their options. And so, yeah, I think we need to be aggressive until we get this list down, because this list is really bigger, according to our tax collector, much bigger than it should be. Yeah, so we do need to be more aggressive with this, and it's really, my opinion, it's kind of inhumane. I mean, it may sound inhumane to force the issue, but some of these people, we forced the issue, they sold their homes and they still had equity in their homes versus holding on and ultimately having no equity in their homes. So, that's what we're doing.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Starr?
The longer explanations draw my attention because it looks like you're trying to explain too much in too short a space. The first one was page 93 of the electronic backup, which would be the expenditure variance report, page 1, human resources, property insurance. Just the last sentence was curious. Lower right-hand corner, in addition, property rates are increasing due to deteriorating market conditions. What does that mean?
Yeah, so I could, best person to ask would be Rob O'Connor from Assured Partners. I just think that for property, it is it's a rough market because there was a big increase in what we budgeted and what the actuals, as you can see with the actual.
Property insurance market.
Yes, yes, I think he was just referring to the overall property market.
In the same time period, residential alone was seen upwards of times 20-25%. So on the commercial side, it's something that we're evaluating. Kerma's also got a not necessarily spectacular risk tolerance in the area coastal, so certainly affected us as they look at the portfolio.
Second one, page 4 of 6, 96 of the electronic backup. This would be police. Oh, yeah. I think we might have discussed this during the budget season, so this may just be in the way of a reminder. Education and memberships, the last line. Major rise in union members exercising union benefit of job-related education reimbursement. What do they use it for?
They can go to college and get reimbursed. Through the union, yeah.
I asked. Last one, ECC. I think that explanation could use further explanation. It looks like there's a lot going on there.
Oh, okay, so the way ECC works is we budgeted 1.9 million this year, which then goes as a revenue source into the ECC fund, right? So now that the ECC is operational up at Sacred Heart, right, and we share it with Westport, that is our budgeted contribution, which is 67% of their operating costs, and there's some revenue also associated with it. The state gives us some, Westport, and New Canaan Fire. So what happened this year is, I think we talked about it last quarter, is that there was some overtime costs that were over budget. So the control board meets every quarter, I think it is, right? Yeah. And they go over the actuals, because we have to bill Westport. And so they were alerted that, hey, there's, we're gonna be over what we thought our projection was. So they all agree on all the invoices that kind of flow between us. Westport then pays us. So it's only one line out of our budget. All of the activity happens in a separate fund. So that's why it can transfer out number, and all of the revenue and expense happens in a different fund. So this is just the town's contribution to the FCRD or the
Do
ECC.
we have any sense how it's tracking now?
So a couple things to add to that. So overtime was something that was driving overage expenses. Something else, and this was discussed in the budget, but the way we budgeted revenue for the ECC in FY24 was we had an anticipation of another municipality coming on. And if that municipality comes on, then it offsets the expenses, the amount of money that Westport and Fairfield have to pay. That municipality did not end up coming on the budget for FY25. We took that municipality out because at this time, we didn't think it was a reasonable assumption to make. So you're getting less revenue than budgeted, if you're driving up the amount that each municipality has to contribute. In addition to that, you also had a less than budgeted state aid that was also due to the formula for state aid. So those are items that created the shortfall where we had to contribute more from the general fund. For this year, I would say, it's still early in the fiscal year. I believe they're fully staffed, so the overtime earnings, seem to be on track, and that number was up by about 150,000 in the FY25 budget. So for this year, I'd say it looks like it's on track. The collective bargaining agreement is still being negotiated, so when that agreement gets negotiated, if people decide to retire, that could drive the overtime up. You really never know until that happens. But for right now, I'd say things look okay.
Thank you, Mr. Dark. Mr. Walsh?
When I see transfers or adjustments, are those transfers that we made during the year of the Board of Finance?
Yes. They're either encumbrances that carried forward
Carried forward.
or it's a transfer that you guys made out of contingency.
Okay, great. And then,
Okay, any other questions on this item? Okay. Just one final question. So that $1,225,000 budgeted contribution to surplus. Hope I'm getting my years right here, but that was we budgeted the extra investment income and then we put that in. Is that the amount that we need to hold harmless on the fund balance?
I mean, it was, yes.
It was, okay.
Yes.
So that might tweak a little based on where the final numbers go, but
Yes. And
so right now, if we were to, so assuming that's the amount that does go into fund balance, there's this, give or take any audit adjustments, a $12 million surplus that would have to be made, or decision would have to be made now, right?
Yes.
Okay, got it. All right.
One last thing I want to say, not that I want to keep talking about the quarterly. Just because this happened last year, the warm weather accounted for $750,000 of this surplus. So again, it's something that you can't really know, but, and that happened last year as well, so.
All right. Thank you.
That's okay. When you say the warm weather, you mean just reduction in utilities or?
Utilities, then the beaches, golf was increased. Yeah, snow plowing, all the overtime for snow plowing was, very favorable, yeah.
All right, thank you. Okay, so we can, if it's all right with everyone, we can move on to item 6. Here, consider and act upon the reappropriations of the fiscal year 24 account surpluses. Can I have a motion to hear this item? Curly seconded by Mr. Mottola. The backup for this item begins on page 130 of the posted backup. It's entitled Town Reappropriations for the fiscal year ended June 30th, 2024. Is there any public comment on this item? See anyone online? No one here. Okay. All right, so Caitlin, are you gonna take us through this?
Yeah, I could start.
Okay, and just before we, so there's requested reappropriations for various departments. Mr. Gerber, is there anyone from the departments here available on any of these items if needed?
We have Eli if we need him, and I'm not sure if James isn't on, but I can text him.
Okay, well, let's just, we'll see if there's any questions, but okay. Eli would be
Yeah, we're
for, yeah, what would Eli be for?
Capital projects.
You may have some background on it, but.
Okay,
Good.
all right, Caitlin, why don't you?
I texted him.
Yeah.
All right,
Yeah,
let's see what, Caitlin, why don't you take us through, can you just first start with, and maybe for the benefit of the public,
What these are.
what this is, yeah, the
So these are items that were budgeted in 24 that for whatever odd reason, they weren't able to receive the goods or services. And there was not a PO created for a vendor, so they didn't know what vendor or the exact dollar amount. So these would be additional expenses to what we just spoke about, even though I incorporated it in that other number. But these are additional expenses that goes against the authorization for each department.
So they were not accrued, not encumbered.
Yes.
So they would have to
If
be.
these are, they would then get expensed in fiscal year 24.
It's an accounting thing, right?
Okay.
Go ahead through.
All right, so it's a little larger this year. It's $1.6 million. So we can start at the top, FairTV. And again, there should be letters or some documentation, and it should be in order by the department from the department head. I say, okay, what's your request and why should these be carried forward? There's a letter from the new manager or the production manager of FairTV, Luke Altieri. He wrote as to why the 17,000 should be allowed to be increasing his budget in 25. In theory, you guys could read it, there was some leftover funds. Again, this would just put him, he's still under budget. So this isn't like he's going over budget, this would just let him spend the 17,000 that was not spent last year, to spend it next year.
But so on something like this, that TriCaster, was it in his budget and he just didn't get to it before year end? Or he had extra budget and this is what he wants to spend it on?
I think it was the extra budget.
It is the
he's
latter.
new,
Okay,
And
got
it's
it.
new, so
Yeah,
it was.
So I spoke to Luke and in between when we approved the budget for FY '25 and now this came to his attention as something that he was looking to purchase. And so he wanted to, he didn't know about the time constraints coming with the year in the end. That ties into where he's being new. He didn't realize that some of the encumbrances related to some of the professional services that he uses would go away, so he didn't realize he had as much. And this is something, a piece of equipment that came to his attention that he would have wanted to buy, and he believed that it was more prudent to buy it sooner rather than later for FairTV.
I was gonna say, maybe we'll take questions on each item
Sure.
as we go through.
I just have a general question, just to understand. So this 1.6 million, you said was accounted for when we discussed before.
It's in that overall, the $13 million surplus, so this surplus would go up if these are not approved.
So
So we have to approve these in order for them to be expensed, but she treated the previous surplus as though it was already approved.
Yes.
So you have this accounted for as
Yes.
if we approve it,
Right.
meaning the surplus would be the 1.2. So if we approve it, it's not going to impact the budget that we just approved, right? That's what you're saying.
Correct.
Just want to make sure.
Yeah, and can I just restate that, make sure I heard that correctly
Yeah.
too? So the $13.3 million surplus on the previous page would be 14.9 if we don't approve it.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Ms. Leclerc?
So Caitlin, do you know why he had extra funds? What he didn't need to spend this money on?
So he uses a lot of contractors, let's say, to, host these meetings and do whatever editing. And at the beginning of the year, he'll just create it, they'll expense it, create an encumbrance, and then just draw down on that encumbrance over time. So, towards the end of the fiscal year, he didn't realize that those encumbrances, he was gonna use less than he encumbered, so he was gonna have this money left over. He wanted to buy this TriCaster, this piece of equipment. Thought he didn't have enough money, was gonna maybe wait until the next fiscal year, but having those encumbrances come off the books, then
So it's less in like contracted services, is that?
yeah.
What type of, I'm
Yeah.
just.
Yeah,
also-
it's fees and professional services. You can see they left that on the table. On the expense.
But just, were there less meetings or did the meetings get
Also-
easier because of the new technology? Like what?
Well, so
was
part of
the-
it, so I think he used less than the prior director had used, but also the fee for the prior director was higher than what he's getting paid, so that also created, I think it was like a $15,000 difference. So that's a majority of it.
Gotcha, okay.
Just one more question on the process. Are we gonna vote on these as individuals or are we going to approve it in total?
I think we'll vote on it in total, but if anyone wants to not approve a piece, you can
Make a motion or back it out?
motion to amend it, yes.
Thank you.
Okay, any more questions on FairTV? Mr. Walsh, Jeff?
No.
All right, Caitlin, HR?
HR, this guy has been hanging around for a couple of years. This is 75,000. That I believe my little footnote has from fiscal 22. So, as you know, there's a new system going in.
So we're finally using
So it
this.
should be.
Okay.
The assessor, as you guys know, there's a reval coming up. Ross wrote a little request that, again, he has $195,000 left. And he would like to bring that forward to use in the 2025 ballot.
And I think his note says that he expected the work to start sooner, but he hasn't.
Yes.
So he's still gonna spend it, it's just a question of time.
Yeah,
Okay.
yep.
The reval is not changing in cost, is what he's saying, it's just when it's being.
Timely.
Right.
It's a timing thing.
Yeah.
Okay, fire. transfer to regional fire school, 237,000. There's a couple pieces of backup, I believe. Again, they should be in order. I don't know if Frank, you wanna talk about this one or David?
Yeah, so I could just kind of talk about what I did. So this is related to an FLSA, the regional fire school. Historically, the firefighters that have been instructors have been paid $25 an hour. I believe Human Resources became aware that rather than being paid 25 hours, the firefighters should be paid their overtime rate. And so what I did for this was I made a for the backup that you guys have, I did an estimate of what retroactively we would owe these firefighters. Their overtime rate less than $25 an hour. And so that's what the backup is showing, and the gross amount that retroactively we would owe is about $237,634. And I can answer any questions about the calculation in the backup, and David could add any questions that he may have.
Yeah, David, was this an HR
Yeah,
identified this, or was it the union?
identified
The union identified
Okay.
it, and then.
The union made notification, roughly February of 2023, which then creates a 2-year look back. And this is an attempt to finally put this issue to bed before it turns into agreement. So there's a retro payment required, that's FLSA, frankly for years that handled the way that they were. But we are attempting to finally address this and treat this as an appropriate time to
Okay,
utilize funds to.
so did they? I don't remember hearing about this. When we go through contingency and we have those discussions about potential, contract settlements, was this came to our attention in February 23? Okay.
Being told February of 2023 was the first
I
time.
mean, am I misremembering? Was this ever incorporated into any risk analysis?
About this before.
We were not.
So,
Okay.
so I believe in the budget meeting, so I remember mentioning it in a budget meeting. But what I will say about it is I'm not an attorney, I don't know FLSA, right? So if someone says it's still being investigated, really don't know whether it's something that the town's gonna owe. I didn't know as much about that during the budget.
Well, it sounds like it was a claim by the union that you've been underpaying us. They're in a collective bargaining agreement, requires a certain amount of money per hour payment. And they made that claim in February of 2023 and town was investigating it, I assume, right? Is that how it came up?
I don't wanna speak to the details of that.
Correct. And I believe Frank is correct, we mentioned during budget that may be,
There's an issue.
that there may be an issue and that we were still working through that. And we became aware of it right about around, I would say, but around February, March timeframe. And had a meeting, with attorneys in HR reviewing it. So it wasn't something necessarily to even start to get our hands around how to try to address it. And it's getting to a point, I mean, obviously if we did this in a non-grieved manner in February 2023.
Yeah, they need to be paid.
You've got to address it. So we're bringing forward now. I pushed the issue with HR to get that date of, February of 2023, so we knew what to start to work with and to come to an agreement with the union on the look back window, so that we could, again.
So are we under budgeted on this item for 2025?
Most likely within the fire school, and I know that not just FLSA, but in general, while we brought the fire school budget forward, I remember during the budget process noting that budget is extremely tight. And I think that's where we referenced that there may be an FLSA issue that would drive that number. So at this point, we're probably gonna end up being, it's self-supporting, quote unquote, but it takes a $37,500 payment from the Fairfield Fire Department and, it's basically the town's payment towards it. Which is a bargain compared to what would happen if we didn't have a fire school in Fairfield where we would have to send entire shifts.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I don't think we've never done a separate vote on the fire school, even though it's a self-sustaining fund, it's small. I mean, we do WPCA separately, we kind of look at the regional dispatch center separately, but we didn't do the fire school. So maybe, I take you at your word that we might have talked about it. I just do not remember it. Jim?
Hard time understanding this. So we have a firefighter and we pay them to be a firefighter, correct? We're not paying them to be an instructor. That's a separate job. That's a separate job if they want to teach at this fire school, which is a regional fire school.
No, they're not per the union contract.
So what you're saying, Jim, is we did go out, when we found out about it, we went out for, outside review, legal review. And so the way we're moving forward is the way I think it was determined that this is how we have to handle it. As if there's no mechanism for us, or no argument for us to deny.
So the regional fire school doesn't just employ Fairfield firefighters, right?
Right.
It's supposed to be regional, right? So we're supposed to be able to get firefighters from across the state of Connecticut, correct? And what do those towns have to pay those firefighters who teach there overtime as well?
They want to send their firefighters there and pay them out of their budgets, then it's that employer paying them. We pay them, we're a separate employer, so we pay them at a different rate. Because there are employees doing that work paid by us, both functions, they're being paid as employees of the town. So they're two separate employers. So if our firefighters want to go instruct at, the Valley School or something to that effect, then it would be at a different rate.
What?
It would be at a different rate. It's a separate employer. If you're, the FLSA doesn't apply if you're at a different employer.
Okay.
You could have do the exact same thing to two completely separate employers for 2 40-hour weeks, and just like you'd never have overtime at the other employer because you're at one employer versus the other. They're two separate employers. In this instance, it's the same employer. Fire school goes off of the REIN, it's through our payroll system. They're town of Fairfield employees doing town of Fairfield work, and it's in the same scope of work. The employees in the same scope of work.
So will it be cheaper for the fire school to hire out-of-town firefighters to do the teaching?
We wouldn't be able to get enough to actually do it. I mean, we use a blend between Fairfield and non-Fairfield.
I can't hear you, David.
Sorry, I know that the angle from you. We use a blend of instructors. So I don't foresee us moving to 100%, out of town and not using any of our in-house as instructors. I mean, it's cheaper when we use a firefighter versus a lieutenant at the same rate if because they have a different overtime rate, or a senior firefighter and a junior firefighter. They have a cadre of instructors, and they look for the instructors that are best suited for that specific task. So it may be someone doing driver training, it may be somebody running an extrication class. They look for within that pool the ones that have the right certifications. Not everybody instructs. They have to have a baseline of certifications and be instructors, and then also specialize in that area. So
this is kind of an added expense now for the fire school. This is not what was sold to us when we agreed to build the fire school 5-6 years in our town.
State of Connecticut built $12 million state-of-the-art fire school, turned it over to the town of Fairfield. Town of Fairfield, unlike all the area fire departments, sends its equipment down there and personnel on a daily basis on duty. Other towns that train oftentimes have to backfill their stations, or take trucks out of service and pay overtime. A lot of times, frankly, don't use facilities of that caliber. So I to that extent, and I just mentioned the 37,000 roughly payment that we put in from the fire department. That payment is probably low compared to the actual benefit that we get. We run town meetings. We utilize the facility at no cost for our police department to train. I mean, there's a host of things that we do, and we do them on a daily basis, that other towns, don't necessarily do. So we didn't build it necessarily at our cost, a $12 million building, and then start handing it out to everybody else. So it's complex. You are right. This is going to cause a problem in our budgeting, and we are going to have to get more aggressive with the classes that we run, work with them from a P&L basis to try to evaluate that. Not every class necessarily as it is profitable. Some of them are profitable and will remain profitable. Some of them are not. But if you're going to run a fire school and you're going to attract people for the profitable classes, sometimes you need to run, some of them are loss leaders. The state of Connecticut does make a payment to the fire school. That payment under the Moy era had dwindled down to essentially zero. And Vermont era, it actually has fortunately come back up and been somewhat robust. With that comes the sort of purpose of the fire schools, which is sort of the baseline of firefighting for career and volunteers. So we have some programmatic pieces that and not all of those are necessarily profitable. And it is complex because when you raise the prices to a certain level, particularly the Fire 1, Fire 2, back to basics classes, you start to see headcount drop. So, we're for tonight's purposes, we are looking to address the FLSA piece. We know that it's got a time sensitivity because it's dragged on. Moving forward and including during budget, and by that time, we plan to come back with a much more comprehensive look at the fire school, which I don't think really, if I know, hasn't really been done in quite some time, and needs to be done to figure out what's the pricing, how much is Fairfield's payment worth, what does a realistic P&L look like, what is the blend of instructors, and what can we do to balance that out, and we intend to come back with that.
Are you saying there's gonna have to be a new budget line within the fire department for overtime for the fire school?
No, that's all run out of the fire school's budget as is. My only comment is that I personally think, as an individual, and I think that in my capacity on the town side, that the line that is inside of the budget, Fairfield Fire Department, quote unquote, pays to the fire school. It's the town's payment, sort of base seed money, say, for the year, but it's really for the use of the fire department is actually very, very low compared to what our realistic cost would be if we didn't have a fire school there. We wanted to spend even just the overtime, if we wanted to send people to a building in another community, what would it cost us? We'd have to hire entire shifts on a quarterly or actually more frequent basis, completely on overtime, and send them and all of our equipment out of town, and that's what some departments
Now
actually.
they can go train while they're on duty.
They do all of this training straight time on duty. They take 2 trucks, 3 trucks at a time. They mark them as what they call fifth due. If something comes in, they put them back in service, they pull them out of the building, they put them on the truck and they send them. If our trucks were in, Bridgeport or Westport, all the way down in Darien or up in the valley of the tower, that would be very different. And that building is almost daily used at no cost. I mean, including, this board using it for meetings and whatnot. So we get a
Can I
whole.
and I don't wanna go too far down the rabbit hole, but you said the thought is it needs to have a plan. Is that the administration's responsibility, the fire commission's responsibility? Who does the plan? Who's gonna pull this together?
The fire department through one of the assistant chief of training is the director of the fire school. Intention is for the administration to work with the fire department, but largely with the director and the staff down there because they know the numbers inside and out appropriately. And they have stats down to, every single thing that's been done in that building. And so to get a better idea.
So it might be helpful, and some of our board members remember more about this. I've been on the board for 5 years. We've never reviewed this during the budget process since I've been a board member. It might be one of those things that's helpful to look at the plan in advance of the budget, right in advance of the budget, so we don't get, because it's still not that big of a budget for the fire school standalone, but it, just like we've tried to do with WPCA and some other things, maybe we can, once this is pulled together, we can. Mr. Gerber?
Yeah, I mean, I think it in a way, it's similar to the call center.
Yep.
That, this year we met with the police and dug deep into the numbers, and we're trying to came up with a plan and a strategy to sort of turn that around so that we can grow that and bring in other towns in the future and, sort of reach the potential that was originally planned. And for the fire training school, I just want to make sure everyone's clear, it built up this fund balance of 500,000. So Frank and I were just kind of looking at some of the numbers today, and we need to come back sort of with what we think a run rate without making any changes would be. But I think preliminary look is, if you just look at FY24, 108,000, it would probably, if you added that into the P&L, the current P&L for the fire school, it would be a slight loss, not a huge loss, but something between $10,000, $15,000. So it's probably, it's not like a huge loss that we're trying to dig ourselves out of with this. And it has been profitable under the old accounting. This isn't going to necessarily make it impossible to turn around and make money.
So you're saying if we had done this year's budget incorporating the correct pay rates, we would have a small.
It looks like, it was just a 5-minute exercise where we pulled up the year-to-date numbers and looked at a P&L, and we just looked at, looking at this FY24 number of 108,000. If you were to add that in as an expense, it would be a small loss.
Call it 125 all in.
Okay,
Yeah, there's lot,
108 figured you still have a $10,000 to $15,000 shortfall, so it's about 125,000 is the all in number for the year.
120.
You said
We were at a 95,000 gain.
FY24,
If we were to add in the 108, yeah.
Yeah, FY24, you had a surplus of 91,000.
91.
so if the 108 was in there, that's the $10,000 to $15,000.
Yeah, that would then turn into a loss, but, so it's not insurmountable. This isn't like,
so we could deal with that by either looking at the rate structure for some of the classes that we give, and what we charge other towns, and or a change in the contribution going forward from the town.
Right.
Okay.
And same, the fire school is an interesting history. When that new building was built, out of concerns of what it may cost, initial payment from the town, it was essentially told to not run any program. The place sat almost empty at that time for years and has clawed its way back. It is starting in the last, year or two to become, a more vibrant location from a programming standpoint. They do seek out users of the facility for different classes, sometimes at no cost, Fed-run classes that use the facility and that's it, but those users then get on the mailing list and they get on the rent, then they realize they can come and rent the facility for things, and run other classes. There's some businesses, like that, running like EMT classes and things like that. They don't even run it. They pay a fee, or they've changed the model recently. So instead of it running on more of a P&L basis, it's a per head count, they get a fee. So they're looking at things like that, and over time, the place, should continue to almost, not 24/7, but, outside of those evening hours, 7 days a week, be a bustling facility. We need to keep trying to move it in that direction. So.
Okay.
Certainly fixable, and I do agree pre-budget.
Ms. LeClaire, did you have a question?
David kind of answered it, and I guess I was just trying to get a better understanding of the, like, whether, like, the people who teach from Fairfield, it's not their regular hours, it's additional time that they spend teaching. And then, why it doesn't work like the police private duty, like, we come up with a rate that we bill the fire school for the teachers and then reimburse the town with it.
I think maybe when they came up with the rate, they had the wrong cost structure in mind.
I
So
guarantee-
one of the things were.
I guarantee some
I would actually,
very smart firefighter, because I deal with this a lot in my job. Someone looked at that union contract and went, holy cow, we should be paid for this, and that's what happened. That happens more often than not, that both sides don't see something in a contract, and then once I recognize something, and then there's a dispute. I guarantee that's what happened here.
John, I actually think someone from Fairfield went to teach at another school, had a conversation with under the other firefighters, said, "You're getting paid what?"
You're not getting paid overtime for this? Well, boom.
Yeah, and that's how it started.
yeah, and I don't, I know we're going with like with the outside rate piece, to some degree, that would make the fire school portion, which still rides completely off of, you know, the town. I mean, it's our, it's already had.
You could,
It would make it worse because we then charge a higher piece back.
you could negotiate through collective bargaining the rate that the town's gonna pay our instructors to teach over them. We probably haven't done that yet. Maybe we will, but until we do, we have to deal with this right now.
Okay, I just, hopefully we can wrap this. I want to get the questions answered, but I think you guys are going to come back with a plan, but maybe we can try to keep it to this item that we're voting on. Jim, and then Amy.
David, was there anything changed in the last fire contract that would have affected this?
Not that I know of.
So the provision that they're using in our contract has been in the contract for years?
They're not using a provision in the contract, they're using a law. And that law says that they need to be paid the same amount when they do the same type of work. This fits within that scope. They may be instructing, but they're still doing firefighting tasks. It's within the firefight, whether they're instructing it or they're practically putting it on the line, it's still firefighter tasks.
Even though some of this benefits the surrounding towns or that come to it, correct?
It benefits the surrounding towns, but we usually have members of our department in those classes. Maybe not everything.
So we should be increasing the cost for the classes so that some of the other towns could then kind of contribute towards the overtime costs it's costing us, correct?
You know, we're going to evaluate that, but again, if you increase it much, and I can tell you in some instances, $100 in one direction or another, even 50, will just cause people to go either elsewhere or simply I'll take up fire one, which is not.
David, I'm sorry, I think we need a plan, right? So yeah, that could be an option, I guess is the answer, but they're gonna have to evaluate whether that's the right answer. And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, we're spending a lot of time on this item, I wanna make sure everybody.
Like,
Yeah.
this kind of fee is costing us money, even though it benefits other communities. The $1 million plus boat we just authorized is benefiting other communities. We're not getting reimbursed for that. It's like a lot of things we're doing here at Fairfield are benefiting others.
And
We're not getting the benefit out.
And so were all the trucks that came here yesterday while we had a fire in downtown Fairfield that covered all of our stations. Also, 8 days prior, we had an entire town covered by mutual aid from other towns while we had a structure fire. Westport and Bridgeport were here. A month prior, they were here almost all day, all afternoon until almost the evening, covering every one of our stations, even when we had backfill because of the dive incident, including marine assets and divers that came for that dive incident. So it's a mixed bag, but the reality is that we will come with a plan, and we are trying to make sure that this is self-supporting, and if there is a payment additional out of Fairfield Fire that we recommend in some form or from the town, we will do everything we can to quantify out why even the amount that's there now is what it is before trying to add additional dollars. And continue to try to push for this to be, self-supporting. We just want to make sure, and purposes of tonight, is to not end up in a grievance situation and to make sure that we are legally compliant for labor laws, which at this time we're not, and that's an concern. I appreciate where you're at.
You're not really good now.
Okay. Are you good? Ms. Ruggiero?
Struggling, why was this not in the budget?
Why was it not in this year's budget?
Yeah.
The issue was still being vetted and had not been resolved with the union. So
You had no estimate in there for this at all?
the budget was originally compiled while we were at the early stages of finding out about it as an administration.
Great. Any other questions on this item? Great. Big one, DPW operations.
Well, the big one, the next sheet is an email from Mr. Ryan. I believe he is online. And he could take us through some of the 5 projects that he has listed. Again, there is a bunch of backup with each one. I think there's a quote actually for each one, but Jim could probably talk more intelligently than I could. Jim, do you want to start with the firehouse?
James, you're on mute.
See me.
He's off mute.
Hey, James, thanks for joining. You hear us?
Maybe he could turn his camera on too.
Camera?
Technical difficulties. Hey. There?
Fourth.
Maybe while we're waiting, we could.
Yes, you
Start
would.
forward to adjournment.
Well, why don't, I don't know if David or Caitlin, you want to take us through this and then maybe you can get online for Q&A?
Sure,
And work.
I can just blanketly say a lot of these projects were on the facility audit by Silver Petroselli that you
Okay.
guys, so a lot of this will then alleviate bonding in the future.
Okay.
So if, I don't know the individual product details, but I believe, like I said, so any kind of list, Congress Street basement abatement, $49,000. I believe there's a proposal from New England Yankee Construction, and again, it was listed in the capital needs assessment for future bonding. So that kind of covers the first one. The second one, gun range exhaust fan at the police department, $203,000. There's a proposal from Johnson Controls, and again, it was listed in the capital needs assessment for future bonding as well. So you can look at all the quotes. Thirdly, elevator replacement, $320,000. There's an actual bid, I believe, documented here. That is beyond its useful life. There was some talk about how to pay for this. It's one of the larger requests. The fourth one is the HVAC unit at the rec center. Again, there's a proposal in here from Crane, again listed in capital needs assessment. The 2 units are proposed for the $132,000. And in the similar vein, there's another proposal from Crane, again on the capital needs assessment for 4 units needed at Penfield Pavilion. So these 5 proposals add up to the $803,000 that's listed here. Again, DPW was a large part of our favorable variance on the expense side. They were around the 900. So, had these have been known, this 800 offsets the favorability coming in from the DPW operating budget. So again, a lot of these are going to alleviate bonding in the future. These aren't just, I came up with a project idea. They were on the list from Silver Petroselli to be needed. So, again, you can look at all of the quotes and proposals and bids. Basically, the numbers are pretty firm.
Mr. Walsh?
So why can't we pay the $320,880 for the old town hall elevator replacement out of ARPA?
There was talk of it. I think it could jeopardize in terms of the timing. I'm not sure. David, do you?
Yeah, this is, I mean, the thought on using this right now is in part that it's, we actually put it out for bid. Have bid results in, can move on it. It's gonna be something that we wanna move on quickly because of the timing for ordering parts. And the elevator has been breaking numerous times. We've been having problems there. That's an ADA issue. So we moved it into this schedule instead. So
Well, can't we spend it out of ARPA right now?
that would take you until the beginning and the end of October, or early November by the time we through the ARPA window.
I can't hear.
We have to start the schedule for ARPA. It takes about 6 weeks to move through the boards. So from a timing issue where we had some availability now and thought that this was a better move timing wise.
Why didn't we just put this on with the boat? Because we just going through this project. Could have just moved it at the same time. I mean, doesn't seem like it's a new project. It's a project that's been around and been, as Caitlin properly said, Silver Petroselli report had it on there. Why wouldn't we just put it on ARPA and boom, we could spend the money right away?
Timing as we were developing the list, the boat was something that got placed on Board of Selectmen timing to get that approved. So at that time, we hadn't fully developed this list.
Well, the bid just came
The
in.
timing piece and
It came in on the 10th.
Literally, I don't know if you.
Number 10.
Yeah.
Seen it, yeah.
I mean, every item everywhere has a question mark of could it be ARPA, could it be whatever? You look at an email where James wrote, could it be ARPA on it? Because at one point, when we first started talking about, where we would pay for it out of, 6 months earlier, ARPA was one, even asking the board to transfer out of debt service was one. I mean, waiting a year. Then we started having issues with the braking, so we were concerned, so we didn't wait till capital non-recurring for it, we wanted to escalate it.
How much ARPA money do we have that's not been accounted for?
There is.
That's gotta be,
Roughly 1 million,
that's gotta be identified by the end of this year.
correct.
Why don't we just put it on for another thing? All three bodies know that we gotta do something by the 31st. Why don't we take the $320,000 or whatever it is and just put it on as one of the items that we know we have to spend money on by December 31st? We all know that this is coming back to us sometime in December on a final list. Why don't we just put this on there? This way we know. I'm starting to get nervous about projects not going on.
So can I just, did I hear you say it's a safety issue and the time to put it back on the ARPA list would take 6 more weeks to get it through?
Looking at
Okay.
October, early November essentially before we can at least placing the order for the parts,
Yeah.
whereas this we can do tomorrow.
Okay, just as a reminder, I think if you recall on that ARPA list, there was a significant amount of paving catch-up that still had to be done. And so any money that's remaining, we talked about, at one point, I think we were asked, and we nixed it, to approve a couple $1 million of that ARPA money going to paving. Now there's only $1 million left, so I'm not worried about that part, about getting it encumbered, but I think what I just heard was this was a matter of timing. Sorry, Mary?
But paving's more of a budget item, and this is a one and done kind of thing that would be better for ARPA money.
I mean, you could say that about any of these, right? I don't know why this is in the memo like this, but
It's in the memo because it's literally an email and James put that on there. I mean, which I would say, like, if that exact same line.
I'm saying the entire 800,000, you could say, why don't we put this all to ARPA? Why don't we pay,
I would though.
Well,
Well,
the administration doesn't
We have,
feel that all this
Mark
should.
Barnhart's gonna be coming before us with for another property. For Habitat for Humanity housing. We've got some of this accounted for, hopefully.
Okay. Mr. Curley?
So I just want to make sure I understand it. I agree, we have to make sure that all the ARPA money is encumbered and spent, and I have no concerns that we'll get through that list by year end. But I want to make sure I understood the point that you were making, Mr. Baker, in terms of the timing issue. Because this elevator is breaking down and it's a potential ADA issue or safety issue, if this is approved tonight, you'll be able to move forward and start the project and get it prepared relatively quickly. Whereas if it goes through the ARPA route, it could be 6 weeks before you can start the project. So from a timing perspective, this allows the work to be done sooner, correct? Okay, so I just want to, thank you.
So I just want to understand what you said. So this 320,000, we know we have to spend. And the administration has a special project that you're going to hold for Habitat for Humanity that you want to use the ARPA money for.
Yep.
When we know we have to spend this money, so it's going to be perceived that we're spending the ARPA money for that, so that we could get that project through. At the end of the day, all we're doing is costing the taxpayer $320,000.
We have another body that has to approve ARPA, and that's the RTM.
We have till December 31st.
That
This is
body-
just a way to kind of play something you
That
want.
body has,
Just call it what it is.
Something that we.
that body has ideas of how that money should be spent.
What are you shaking your head about? I'm not following. What are you shaking your head about?
Shaking their head.
He's shaking his head and it's very disrespectful. Why are you shaking? your head?
I'm shaking my head because
No, excuse me, but why are you being rude right now? I'm asking a legitimate question.
because you're making it as though we've got some pet project that we want to put through for Habitat for Humanity.
I'm exactly making it that.
It's affordable housing that we're trying to address.
I'm very familiar with Habitat for Humanity. I've volunteered multiple times. I know what it is.
Pour it in one bucket or pay for it in another. There's multiple buckets of money, or you simply don't do some of the projects.
Correct.
What we're suggesting is in the ARPA funding, certain projects be done. There's certain timelines. We're looking at it from a timeline perspective. Bucket that we're looking at right now, we're looking at projects that we would like to see start to move forward and we believe are appropriately placed.
I'm just calling it what it is.
You can move it in either and it's costing the taxpayers, I mean, unless you don't do certain projects, it's costing the taxpayers money, whether it's in this bucket or in theory, ARPA still has, if you do that in ARPA and then you do us paving in ARPA.
I think it's just getting confusing. You're gonna propose that both of those projects be done. And you wanna fund this project out of this transfer because it will allow it to move forward more quickly because it's a safety issue. That's what I heard. Is that right? Okay.
This elevator broke down, was out of commission for, I think, weeks while they were looking for new parts. I mean, this has been an ongoing problem. If you've ever been on that elevator, should we have done it early? It's terrible. So, and you know, we would like to make better use out of that second floor of town hall. We can't do it. So we fix this. Should it have been on the schedule earlier? I don't know, maybe. But we also had Rooster River on for way too long because someone wouldn't let us approve that transfer out. So, you know, that we were just able to do, and now we're stuck, you know, scrambling. But we could put this on, but we have a bid. I mean, I could see if we could extend the bid, but.
Okay, that's fine. All right, if people don't want to approve it, we can take that up. Okay, any other questions on this? Mary?
So I'm just trying to understand, because 2 weeks ago, we approved the fireboat from ARPA, and that was the only thing. So if the elevator was an issue, why
didn't have
didn't we put it there?
We didn't have the bid, we just got the bids in, and this has been elevated, this issue has really been, I basically several weeks ago said we have to go ahead.
And you got
Then my other questions for
September 10th.
And that schedule was prepared in the middle of August. That's my main issue.
and that is where in the budget is this 800,000 from? And will we have it again in this year's budget?
Say that again?
So this is
DPW.
800,000 of expenses that we didn't spend.
So DPW had favorability really due to utilities, mostly utilities, 750,000 of their savings was from
Plowing, that,
the warm weather stuff, yeah. Yep.
and so we don't know yet for this year. Okay.
The next.
Just one more question, sorry. So I understand they had the favorability in that's what kicked out a bunch of the favorability in the other line, which makes good sense to offset it, but I just wanna understand. This 320,000, was that in our budget for next year since we've known about it, or it wasn't anywhere?
It was not in the operating budget,
So it hasn't been
so I
accounted.
think it would have been a future bonding issue. So would it probably come before the capital non-recurring, I would assume,
Okay.
unless it would come as a standalone.
Yeah, well, we had a building, maintenance review done, when did Brenda do that? A few years
Yeah, a
ago?
couple years ago.
And they identified a litany of issues with our buildings. They prioritized them. And we've been systematically, the projects have been getting prioritized and approved. Some of them have happened through the operating budget, some have happened through the capital budget. So I don't know is Jim available? I guess my only question is,
Oh, there he is.
okay.
Hey, Jim?
So can I just, I guess the last question, Caitlin, you mentioned these things came from the Silver Petroselli report.
Yeah.
And I recall that report, we had all these deficiencies in our buildings and they were like code red,
Yeah, the priority ones.
code
all the way
yellow,
down.
kind
Yeah.
of, where we get to it, when we get to it. And the code red was critical safety issues or compliance issues, right? I guess, what were these? Were these high priority items? And if this is not the whole population of items, how were these items, I guess, selected for priority to be funded by this transfer?
Are you asking Jim or me?
Yeah,
Okay, I mean, from my perspective, we're looking at utilizing the second floor of Old Town Hall. And you can't really.
I believe you can hear me.
Oh, yeah, we can hear you.
Okay.
We can't utilize the second floor of Old Town Hall.
Can you hear me? Yes?
Yeah, can you hear us? We can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a delay, but if you give me
All
some,
right,
if you give me some time, I can try to explain.
Okay, let's let Mr. The first selectman finish his sentence and then you can chime in. Bill, can you just finish what you're saying?
Yeah, so for the utilization of Old Town Hall, we needed to do a couple things. Jim needed to shore up the building from in the basement, which was not, it's, they needed to shore up some of the pillars so that it wouldn't collapse. Okay, and they did that and they needed an elevator. Because for ADA accessibility to the second floor, this elevator was breaking down and completely inadequate. So once this happens, we'll be able to make use of the second floor and we have potential plans one way or another that's gonna be used. We have the old GE credit space that is empty, and we have space issues. So that's a priority, and that's why this was elevated. Yeah, go ahead, Jim.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Sorry, for the delay, just some technical difficulties. Caitlin did a great job though to sum it up and, I can just go down the list, 1 through 5 if you wanted to give a little more of an explanation, if that's okay.
We're good.
I think we're good.
Okay, questions about anything specific?
I think the only one, Caitlin, you didn't mention, I don't think we heard anything about the HVAC rooftop at Penfield. If you want to just take a minute to explain that one.
Yep, there 4 units on the top of the unit that are fairly beaten up from the salt weather. I figured it was a good opportunity to take advantage of the building being offline right now.
It did come up in the capital needs assessment as like a phase 3 or 4 possibly, which means we would have bonded it down the road, whether that's 5 or 6 years from now. And that goes for, because I think this question must have come up, that goes for the majority of these items. They're all in line for future bonding, but I have been having issues with multiple, with these items, so it's a good opportunity to take care of them now.
Thank you. All right, any further questions on these items? Mr. Stark.
In light of recent experience, I'm curious, how old are the estimates? And are we pretty confident that they'll fit within the budget parameters that this is establishing?
These estimates and bids, yes. These estimates and bids and state contracts are all in the past month.
Great.
Okay, any other questions on the, let's see, is this, we still have 3 more things on this list. Mary, on the DPW?
I just want to confirm that these 5 items on this list are our biggest priorities in town for these type of items, like small maintenance. Is there anything else that's gonna come to us in a week or 2 that we don't know about yet?
Mary, it's a trick question. What's going to break down next? I don't like.
Good answer.
You have the
But yes, that's why 1 through 5, these are my priorities. Yes.
Okay. All right, Caitlin, library.
Okay, let's go to library, whopping $11,400. Head librarian Scott, kind of put a little paragraph together, what this was, that the integrated library systems database was migrated from the town over to a cloud solution. Cloud solution for the museum, the library, Pequot, the town's IT, I'm just reading the funnel really. IT department identified security concerns with the Pequot's network and its connection. And they worked with the town to address it, and it was decided to migrate to a cloud-based solution, and the change was expedited. The contract was just approved. So the migration was completed in August. So again, they had some surplus, the $11,400, and you could see the invoice right below the email.
So this is coming from his own surplus from the library surplus? Okay.
Yep.
They just didn't encumber it as a department, so we're.
Yep.
It was in a salaries account.
Okay.
They,
That's fine.
in theory they could have, but this was cool.
Questions on this one? Okay, splash pad?
The next one, splash pad, I don't know if you've been hearing some stories. There was community user complaints about the brushed concrete at the Lake Mohegan splash pad. So they got a quote to reinstall the floor tiles at this location, which are slip resistant, cushioned, and secures a secure environment for all the guests. It's really a safety issue at this point. And you could see the quote from Headwater Construction Group to get to the $81,538. Again, safety, and if he gets it now, it'll be then for, it'll definitely be ready for next summer.
Mr. Curley?
Yeah, probably don't know the answer to this, but that splash pad's not that old.
I
Is it
know.
a warranty issue?
I know.
No, yeah, can I answer that?
Yeah,
Because I had the same question.
Yeah.
So, they went with, they did not go with this cushion. They went with, concrete, which you can do, and, kids were slipping and hitting their heads, and we got a bunch of complaints. And so, this was the alternative that we did not put in the first time, and now we'd like to put it in.
Yeah, and that was rebuilt after the damage from the hurricane, Ida, I think, right?
It was just rebuilt like within the last 2 years or what?
Surface, I believe they came online with this spring and having problems all season. And
But I mean,
So it's
it
not,
was replaced because it was past its life, right? It was old.
yeah, that, it was replaced and we went with an alternative that other places use, but it resulted in
Okay, so this would be an upgrade on,
it's an upgrade that we did not opt for when it was originally installed.
Any questions on this one?
There's nothing to remove, you just have to add.
Yeah, I think it's just putting it like it's padded.
Okay, and
Okay,
then,
the last one is, I believe, something that the school actually mentioned, the McKinley chiller for 224. The superintendent of schools wrote a memo, regarding how much, again, there's a proposal for the whole chiller being 387. They were able to allocate some of their funds, which is I think what I heard tonight, which leaves a shortfall of the 224, 791, to replace that chiller at McKinley.
so this, unlike some of the other ones here, so these other ones all came out of that department's budget. So the McKinley chiller, which surplus is that coming out of?
It would just come out of our overall contribution to fund balance.
Just the various
Yes.
other,
The splash pad also,
okay, got it.
was not.
Not out of Parks and Rec.
You're gonna see on the operational activity, the fire school, as I alluded to, gave back around, they had a surplus of over 200. So the FSLA thing that we just discussed was 237, so I would need to then give them the difference to make up in their budget, because that would be expense, do that transfer out.
Okay.
So those are the three that kind of are over and above appropriated numbers for each
The
department.
three or the,
Well, the difference for the fire school, the splash pad,
got
and
it.
McKinley.
Just a very quick question. What is a splash pad? Is that?
Oh, it's where the
something
kids play on the water, yeah, and the water kind of spouts up.
all right, any, Ms. Leclerc?
Does anyone know the useful life of the splash pad cushion?
It's, I mean, that was there when I moved here, so.
No, well, the concrete
this-
is lasts longer than what we're gonna replace it with. So that's,
Yeah, I don't.
People don't like it.
This goes over the concrete, but, I don't know.
I could ask Anthony, like.
We can ask Anthony.
Okay, any other questions on any of these items? Relating to the
it was Anthony. Accident.
Oh, I got the, from the company's website, in a climate like ours, between 7 and 10 years.
Thank you, Mr. Stark.
He's here, 15.
All right,
15 to 20.
all right, if there are no,
Helpful.
Mr. Walsh, you have a comment?
Yeah, Caitlin, how much more is this than normal is on these reappropriations? What's the normal amount we've spent?
Well, I wouldn't say reappropriations are normal. They're usually one-off. It's not like encumbrances where we're usually at 1.2 million, 1.3 million, up to 1.5 million. These reappropriations really do fluctuate. Last year, I can go back in minutes, but there was maybe 3 or 4 departments on there, HR being one of them. And I can't remember, IT had a bunch last year. But again, it's really the same process. It's just there's not a PO cut for these.
But this is a larger.
This is larger than.
So your comment, it's the same process. So in other words, if they had issued the PO for year end, there would be an encumbrance, so we wouldn't even be seeing this.
No,
be
McKinley
able to do that.
wouldn't have been able to because they
Right.
were already at their budget. Splash Pad wouldn't have been able to. And for the fire, the difference would not have been able to as well.
Right,
Not
the
the
red, like the
PO for this.
DPW piece, for example,
Yes.
had they done this earlier, they
Yes.
could have just paid for it within their budget. Ms. Leclerc?
I feel like this is somewhat of a different process though, because usually it's for things that were already budgeted, that they need to get to, like, payroll system or something that's carrying forward, or something that was planned, but they didn't encumber it because they weren't ready, but they needed to carry those funds. This is almost, okay, we have extra money, how can we spend it?
Some of it, but like library, it's such a small dollar amount, they could have put a PO in, right? Some of Jim Ryan's things, the 95,000 for some of these That could have gone on a PO under his maintenance. No one, because he was under budget.
Right.
The HR, when you have FairTV, if they knew who they were going to be paying, they could have encumbered that, but really. So
The assessor
the
number,
assessor,
that's consistent with what you described.
we've done
Yes,
it, we've done this.
They
before.
meant to spend it, they didn't spend it, they planned to spend it, it's a timing issue.
Yes.
Yeah, I think in the past, they encumbered these things, so
Sure.
we didn't see them for the
Yes.
most part, and the ones we did see were the couple
Yeah.
of the type that actually need.
So a few of these are anomalies, but most of it could have been done through the PO process.
Any other questions?
No, it's not on this, but I do,
All right, well, why don't we vote on this and
Yeah,
then
so-
we can.
that my question or point was gonna be, I think there was a comment about, do we want to do this in bulk or on a line by line basis?
Well, it's on the agenda in for one item, so if anybody wants to make a motion, they can do that, otherwise we could take this to a vote.
I actually have a question. Could you, Amy, can you walk me through what you would have done with the items that we were looking for that potentially could go to ARPA? If we use ARPA for those, it's,
Yeah, thank you for asking, actually. I mean, I guess I'm just concerned, to what, Claire's point was with like the paving. I just wanna make sure we use every penny that we've got.
well, so I'm saying that you would take like that, let's
I
say
would
eight hundred
use
thousand.
it for this because we know it's there, it's ready, it could go through, it's, you know, and then as far as the habitat, it would come separately, and I'm sure, I love Habitat for Humanity, I'm sure I would support it, but it's separate and distinct. I mean, we're still gonna hear about it as part of ARPA, but I just wanna use the money as quickly as possible for unique projects.
And the money and the money that wouldn't be reappropriated would go to.
Well, that just goes to surplus, it just falls through, so it's just, this would basically come through, your surplus would go a little higher by this, 300,000.
And then we'd have to transfer.
And then instead of ARPA being used for the habitat, that would just be a separate and distinct, which wouldn't be part of the budget, but we would be voting on it independently, knowing that we're going with an unplanned budget item.
So, and then I have a question, so how much is left for paving on how much is like line item for paving?
Recent ARPA, but most of that money
One-off.
had allocated has been spent. So
But I don't-
We don't have, we have 1 million unallocated ARPA funds, okay? They said they have something in mind for Habitat for Humanity, the rest, something else could come up, so I don't think there's anything allocated toward paving at this time. But that is what we've talked about a number of times is that would be a backstop because there's a state of Connecticut schedule, like we could encumber
Right away.
paving money on December 31st if there was any danger of not
Is there anything
using
left over?
Okay, yeah. All right, all in favor of approving the reappropriations referenced in item 6 of the agenda, as set forth in the meeting materials? Please say aye. Okay, it is unanimous, 8-0. All right, so we'll move to item 7. To hear, consider, and act upon fund transfers for fiscal 24 operational activity. Can I have a motion to hear this item? Ms. Ruggiero, seconded by Mr. Curley. The backup for this item begins on page 187 of the meeting materials. And the schedule is titled, this is the,
Transfer for
fund transfer for fiscal 24 operational activity. Okay.
Okay, so
Caitlin?
this is just basically truing up the departments that are over budget in total, which are the ones located on the right-hand side. So that's where the surplus is coming from on the left. So I'll go through the departments that are over budget. Some of this is stuff we've already just discussed. Retiree benefits, I don't know if anyone noticed on there, the comment section. The HR department updated salaries to the provider of the long-term disability for the 401A people. So really it was a true up. So that went over budget a little bit by $27,000. Tax collector was small dollar amount due to postage increased 748. Unemployment compensation, again, it was listed on the variance report. The claims were higher this year than budget for 41,357. Now that fire department 39,000 is the difference between their surplus and the 237 that we just discussed for the FSLA. So in order to make the fire department whole, they need $39,000 to be transferred in. The police department, again, you probably saw on your expense variance reports, they're over budget in total by 113,000. Basically, if you read the comments, due to some Q4 overtime dollar amounts was the bulk of it. In addition to, they had mentioned the union-based college advantage that they can take advantage of. Animal control, again, we've seen this all year. Overtime cost 49,000, which is somewhat now more under control than it had been, as they have hired a full-time person down there. The $229,000 ECC transfer that we talked about for the FCRD to true up this past fiscal year. Smith Richardson Golf Course, 73,975 was all for the additional seasonal costs, which went hand in hand with the increased golf play. And the last two were the two that we just looked at on the reappropriation schedule. Again, the splash plat for the 81,000 and McKinley Chiller for the 225, which would come out of a transfer out, because those are capital non-recurring projects, and those over to a capital project. So that amounts to 881,000. And again, we have just the big departments that had leftover money was the solid waste and recycling, and we have some money left over in the contribution surplus. Again, budget to budget transfer, it does not affect the quarterly at all.
So, and I'll open it up for questions, but just to clarify, like, the reason we're approving the last two twice is they have to get into the right department, and then they have to be carried over to this year.
Correct.
So this is maybe going a little bit backwards, but this is to get them into the right department. And then for 24, and then that 24 appropriation, what we just voted on was to bring it into 25. Or am I going?
They will all go into 25. This now, since the project is approved, so to speak, now I'm going to say, okay, well, where are we gonna move it to? So that department, because I'm gonna move it out to a transfer out to capital non-recurring, has no budget in it.
Got it.
So in order for me to spend it, we have to put a budget in here so that it could be spent.
And
these are all budget transfers.
okay. And so there, to pay for these overages, we had money in solid waste and recycling. And then the 614, that
Which
was
is the difference in the contribution surplus. Those, the 1225, you had already transferred out 500 and you transferred out the 111.
got
So
it.
it just gives me a big bucket. I could have taken it probably from 6 different other departments, but I'd have to list them all to get me to $600,000. It's, again, budget only, budget, not touching actuals.
I guess to the same line of questioning, why would we not be moving, I guess, the whole 1.6? Because
Some of
they're
it,
short.
so let's just talk about DPW.
Yes.
They have 900,000 in there, so they can take the debit for 802,000. So it wouldn't make them over budget. These are only departments that are over budget or will be over budget due to the splash pad and McKinley. All the other ones were naturally over budget, the 748.
So like fire though, for example.
So the fire was
wouldn't
tricky.
we wanna put like the 200
So they already had 200 left in there. They already had 200 left as favorability to their budget in total. So they only need the 39 to be able to expense the 237, I'm rounding, but.
Okay.
It's the net.
So basically, this is timing in the sense that they have some left over.
The fire department had 100.
Incremental that they need.
They need now due to the listing of projects that was just. So if you didn't approve the chiller and the splash pad, they wouldn't be on.
So this is basically moving money into the budget we just approved to help them offset these expenses.
These additional expenses, correct. If they needed budget money.
Wouldn't we help them? We not have that issue with, potential run rate costs that.
So this is only budget dollars. I'm not touching anything. And when Frank does his budget analysis, he doesn't look at these types of transfers. This is moving budget dollars. So, for example, I'm just gonna pick on tax collector. They were over budget in total by $748 due to the increased price of postage. So in order to make them whole, I need to increase their budget by $748 because their actuals are slightly over, and you can probably see it on the meter sheets. So in order to do that, I need to take budget money from somewhere else. So I'm decreasing the budgets in solid waste and recycling because they have room there. And I'm moving $748 as a budget transfer over to tax collector to make them whole, because legally, the tax collector would have been over budget.
Yeah, they can't legally overspend their appropriation.
Yeah, they can't.
So, when they do, and we hear about it during the quarter legal year, when they do, we have to take action by adjusting their budget, adjusting their appropriation up, and we take it out of another fund that was under budget, or another department that was under budget.
That's helpful, thank you.
Any questions on this? Okay. I should have asked for public comment. I think there's any. See anybody in the chat? All right, so you can vote on this if there's no more questions. All in favor of approving the fund transfers referenced in the agenda and set forth in the backup? Say aye. Okay, thank you, everyone. It is unanimous 8-0. Right, so we will go to item 8, to hear an update on vacancies. This item is a little bit different, so this doesn't necessarily relate to the quarter or the fiscal year end that we just talked about. This is current vacancies based on a request from our colleague, Mr. Walsh. The backup for this item begins on page 188. Who's going to take us through this? Frank?
So on this page, you'll see two tables. They both contain the same amount, the same data. I just sorted them differently, anticipating how people may want to look at it. So basically what I did here, I took a look at the budget, and then I took a look at the system to see what positions in the budget currently aren't filled. And I reached out, I worked with the department heads to confirm this information. So what you have here is position, department, vacant as of date, duration in days. And, like I said, the first table is going to show you longest duration to shortest duration. One of them is an anticipated retirement. And then the bottom is going to show you by department vacancies. And I can answer any questions.
So Caitlin, you would use this information when you do the first quarter update to, okay.
Yep.
Ms. Ruggiero.
Why isn't CFO on here?
Oh, that's shown as operations director because we have an interim CFO.
Mr. Curley?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I want to make sure I'm interpreting this right. These are all open positions that are still open?
Yes, this is everything as of the time I ran this report on 9/10.
So
This is what was open.
So if there was an open position for, call it 120 days that went from February to August and then filled, that would not be on this list. So there'd still be a budget savings for that
Yes.
120 days, but that's not being captured in your staff.
Yes.
Okay, that's fine.
Thank you, Mr. Curley. Ms. Ruggiero? Sorry, one more.
When I look at this, for example, like police officers and firefighters, how many are we down 2 police officers and 2 firefighters? Is that what that means by each line, or I always worry with first responders?
Yeah, so the answer is a little bit nuanced because in the system, we could have a police officer in the academy.
Yes.
And I'm gonna still show it as it being filled. So to get the absolute of how many guys aren't on patrol, I'd probably have to go to the police department or the fire department. I think the fire department, I don't think they have, I think everybody's on the line. I don't know if,
I don't think there's any vacancies.
I don't think there's,
One vacancy, but again, I mean, particularly with injuries in those departments, they run. Right now, you also have somebody who's out on long term, and you've got one of the firefighters marked as sort of that negative count. That's a retirement we know is coming up. So those numbers ebb and flow. Those departments are used to carrying a few vacancies without causing they backfill with overtime and so it's not an abnormal occurrence for them. They have academy dates and timelines with their hiring as well to manage.
Other questions? Mr. Welch?
So we post jobs on something called governmentjobs.com. I guess my question is, the current jobs the town of Fairfield has posted right now, it's contracting grants manager, where is that position on your chart?
This is just full-time vacancies.
This is full-time, so we had a part-time grants manager who,
It says full-time, we have it listed, the town has it listed as full-time. The current salary listed is $76,144 to $105,000, $847 annually. I can read you the job description if you want.
no, yeah,
Well, but that wouldn't have been, these are things that are budgeted that are vacant, right? So this is like a new, I think that would be a new job you're looking at.
No, I'm not asking you, I'm asking the administration.
My
yeah,
idea.
we're looking to replace someone who left, who's half-time with someone who's full-time. So,
Okay, but she's not, why is it listed as a full-time? It's not a vacancy, you're looking for a new position? How about, there's one position listed here for a 10-month part-time school nurse, is that listed here?
No, cause no, I
Part-time?
wouldn't include the part,
And not include
part-timers.
or seasonal.
Okay, what about, there's a position for a wastewater laborer.
I just think this is just the general fund, I didn't include the WPCA.
How about a laborer, public works?
I believe, so I have on this sheet, if you look, the by department would be easier, so the third and fourth lines from the bottom, auto equipment operators. Those are kind of interchangeable with laborers. If you look in the budget, the way I showed the number there is AEO/laborer. So they're interchangeable. So.
And there's another full-time position for, just want to make sure it's not here. A project manager construction. Job that goes from a range of $87,000 to $121,000 annually.
So there is if you look under engineering listed as, there is something listed here, there was a senior civil engineer, that is vacant. I don't know if it was anticipated to fill that with the project manager or if that would similarly be.
that must be the engineer who left, he was a project manager. He was an engineer.
Maybe a title.
Okay. I will say that there's nothing saying that the person's gotta be a civil engineer in the position. Are substitute school nurses listed? Or is that just Board of Ed?
No, substitute school, no, nurses are all on the town side and subs aren't listed here.
They aren't full-time.
Oh. Okay, so that's, I guess, one question. The second question I have is why aren't all these other positions listed on this site that are listed on you? As a way to try to find somebody. I mean, if somebody wanted to work in the town of Fairfield, shouldn't all of these positions that are listed be advertised just like the positions I read to?
They go through their own.
Like.
You advertise for
like
police and firefighter, yeah.
The Human Resource Department, why shouldn't that be listed here?
Who, police and fire?
Excuse me?
Who, I'm sorry.
The Human Resources paralegal position. Why wouldn't that be listed on the site?
I don't know.
Still evaluating, I mean, in certain instances, evaluating, I mean, we're necessarily gonna fill some of these positions. So paralegal and human resources may not get filled in the same form. So
But
that position may or may not necessarily get filled and hire a paralegal in there, so.
so we're not gonna have a paralegal in the human resources
Right
department?
now, we're leaving that position as vacant
Oh, on purpose? You're not trying to find somebody to fill that vacancy?
at this time.
Okay, so so it's your intent, are you saying right now that for the fiscal year 25, you do not fill in that position?
At this time, that there's a lot of runway left in the fiscal year on all those positions.
Is it your intent to fill it with something else or to reorganize that department?
That person was doing FOIA, like full-time almost, so yeah, we're still trying to figure out how we want to handle FOIA.
Who's handling FOIA now if that person's not doing it?
Someone, it was a part-time person in that department who just left, and now it's sort of being shared by a few people.
Because the director, whoever has human resources, Kathleen Simpson, says how much work there is on FOIA requests.
Huge amount of,
So,
people keep quitting.
okay.
Yeah.
That's because of FOIA.
And so hiring a
Should that be a part-time position, the FOIA position, or a full-time position?
and that's something that we're trying to work through. So simply hiring another paralegal and then dropping, full-time FOIA on the person, having them quit after a few months may not be the right solution. So, David. Onboarded another part-timer. They're trying to split the responsibilities there. And we're trying to get a better handle on, some towns. Yeah, and some towns, FOIA is also spread throughout the departments differently, so we're looking at evaluating that versus bonding one paralegal to help full-time to do, it's not really necessarily the best use, and it seems to be not working.
Should the police officers and firefighter positions be advertised on this simple little site? Somebody can see what
That's not where they're-
jobs in Fairfield?
They have their own process that they don't use NeoGov. Are you looking at?
I'm looking at a site that we advertise jobs on called governmentjobs.com
So
in Fairfield, Connecticut.
we use a product called NeoGov. That product pushes out to many different sites, including Indeed and government jobs and other bulletins and systems. So the police officer and the firefighter positions have a different hiring process than jobs. So those would not normally appear in the same channels and process. So the answer for that would be no. The other items that you're listing would flow through that.
David, under your new position as chief operating officer, how large is that department gonna be? What's the anticipated, have you guys talked about that? Are there gonna be other positions under you?
We're evaluating.
Again,
It's things that we're evaluating at this time. So what,
We don't have.
yeah, I mean,
We don't have that structure fully down yet.
you have an anticipated date when you will?
We're sort of taking it slow. We have a function that is focused on project management that is split between engineering and operations, and we're going slowly. So you moved someone who was sitting in WPCA over to town hall. Like Azal is focusing on project management along with Christine. And we haven't really fleshed out what that should look like yet.
Eli is no longer in the engineering department?
He's split between Bucky and David.
Okay. What budget's he being paid out of?
in engineering. We haven't made, and we haven't made any transfers budget wise. We haven't come to the board to transfer.
Okay. Do you have a job description?
Yeah, that, you might be able to see it. It's posted.
Posted on this site, so I don't
We'll circulate that.
get a
Chair.
job description.
Yeah.
100% of his salary, despite working for another area, is gonna be coming out of the engineering department?
He's doing much of the same, I mean, he's basically doing the same thing he was before as project management.
And the WPCA worker, who is that?
Christine was the WPCA engineer.
Okay.
So the goal is to give her broader exposure. She was sitting at the facility full-time and working on a couple of WPCA projects. The idea is to give her broader exposure to this body and other bodies, and no one really had interaction with her. She has great qualifications, and we thought she was, capable of doing more.
So she is now gonna be working in town hall? Is that not?
Yes, she has moved to town hall.
Okay. And is her job now to work you, David, or for you, Bill? What's her job?
I just want to make sure, where are we going with this? Because I
I'm trying to
mean,
figure out the vacancy report. I'm finding out positions.
I know, but if
My next
we're,
question's gonna go vacancy. There are now a vacancy in WPCA.
No, she's just moved her seat. She's doing mostly WPCA projects, but we want her in meetings where she's exposed to other projects.
She's still doing all of her job
So
functions.
far, she's doing all WPCA.
Okay. Is she doing additional functions that are not in her WPCA job description?
Not yet.
She's an her job description is project manager construction. Never specific WPCA. She's been billed out of the WPCA line and at the WPCA facility. We're trying to move project managers to town hall. Primarily, the purpose would be WPCA related items. Obviously, if we have a town employee on either side of those budgets that has excess capacity, and we have clearly with a significant schedule of projects, the ability to assign some amount of volume of work, even in the interim on other projects, we're doing that. Just like there's a fair amount of WPCA related projects and other work that the town side at times carries, engineering or others doing project management related duties without a strict bill back to the WPCA. They pay for an allotment of funds towards project management.
So ultimately, the goal, we have, as you'll see, $500 million, potential that, and what we need to do is manage all of our projects tightly. We're using sort of the same project management software, and it's feeding into spreadsheets that are changed whenever we get new information. We're changing sort of the ranking of how solid our bid, our cost estimates are. And so this is hopefully eventually going to be moving some of the third-party owners rep stuff in-house so that we know that we're managing projects tightly for the town. And the owners reps are incredibly expensive. We could have, if it works out the way we think it should and the way some other towns do, we should be able to have project managers managing multiple projects in a sort of a tightly sort of standardized way that then rolls up to a online spreadsheet that people can dig into.
For a fraction of the price of what an outside consultant charges for an ownership on one single project. Have an employee that is managing multiple projects. And that's something that we're trying to evaluate, where we can ultimately end up with a net of savings and a better result, but we're having problems.
You've had exposure to like one project manager, which is Eli on Penfield, right?
So the woman is coming over from WPCA to be a project manager. Is her salary increasing? That was not in the budget?
Yes, her salary is increasing minimally for the new job, for.
Okay, can you send us the job description, what what the salary of that person went up from to?
Yeah, sure.
We have some sense of what it is, because we're gonna obviously have variances in these things with Caitlin going forward on quarterlies. Further, for Eli, did his salary go up when he took this new position?
Yes.
Okay. And I asked for the job description already, and can you just provide the same salary, what it was to what it is? Because obviously that's gonna hit the engineering department, because that's where he's being paid out of. So that would be great. And both these people, who are they reporting to?
Project manager to Eli and Eli to me.
Project manager to the woman from
Day-to-day
WPA?
basis, they both report to me, but on a day-to-day basis, the project manager goes directly to Eli.
So if we grow, yeah,
Okay, I thought there was gonna be two project managers. So there's gonna be a project manager that's coming from WPCA and those projects that's reporting to Eli.
Correct. And we're currently attempting to hire one more project manager.
Another project manager from the outside?
that's the vacancy.
Okay, and what's that project manager for? Did you explain the WPCA? You explained Eli on the stuff that they're doing with Public Works? What's the other project manager that you want to hire for?
They had a project manager in engineering who left.
Okay.
Yeah, so.
The schedule of work to be done is massive. I mean, we'll go through it next week, but it's at the Capitol Summit, but I don't think it's any surprise to anybody that the schedule over the next 10 years, roughly $500 million, realistically probably more than that. And if we would like to hire owners reps at, hundreds and hundreds of thousands, at times $500,000 over a $3 to $4 million project at a clip, we can go ahead and do that. I mean, this board has wanted owners reps, I believe, along with others. We are attempting to bring this component in-house at a lower price point and assign more overall projects. The owners reps come a very, very expensive outside amount. And the feedback that we have received is while they are helpful and it certainly provide a service at times, we seem to, with our internal personnel, instances where we're getting a better end result. So the plan is that we're trying to build this in a way that we can start to reduce, those line items in these projects as we come forward with funding and ultimately net savings.
And it's your belief that on these $500 million worth of projects that you just said over the next 10 years, that these three individuals on all of those projects are going to be able to do just as good of a job as an owner's rep?
We're starting slow, so we'll see. I mean, Eli, we couldn't have hired an owner's rep Eli's doing a great job on the projects he works on. So it really depends on the talent that's out there. I think that's the project. That's
The number of projects and the complexity of the
Individual
project.
project. Yeah, you might need an outside person on.
Oh, no, it'll
not
be a
saying
mix,
in every
it'll be a
instance, but-
mixture, most likely, but, for some of these big projects, if we have good people, we're better off, in my opinion. I'm better off, I feel more comfortable with than Eli.
And the other problem that we've got is if we are doing it in the way that we're doing it outside, we're not necessarily, what you find is all of the projects that we have across town are siloed out. And then where they're not siloed out, they're spread out into departments and there's really nobody taking sort of an end-to-end ownership from the conceptual, it's 5 years out on the schedule, all the way out to, 3 years past, approval, bidding, and actually then finally the last pieces of sign-offs being done and closing the project out. There's nobody who takes it from end to end and manages it. So you see on these schedules, the numbers are all over the place, the cash flows are all over the place. The timelines for when they even go to boards. We have issues about who's presenting, what month it should be on what board. There's so many different pieces here. The goal is for somebody on every single project eventually to end, to some degree, actually, we're gonna take ownership on it.
Well, I mean,
And you don't get that outside, even if you go outside for it, you get it at the phase that it's now been bidded out, they're a part of the bidding, and then, you know,
Right.
then they take that section and they run with it, so.
But that leaves plenty of room for someone to make an estimate of an HVAC project that ends up being twice as much. So like, I think if we get someone in, we have the right people in, they're in early at the beginning, hopefully we can avoid that first segment for sure of estimates that are always seem to be off by.
Okay.
Just like to make a comment in general about this. Frank, I think you did a good job for a start. But I think we should try to add a column here that would say some type of expectation on when the position is going to be full. I'm not saying that you'd be held to that, but if you know that you're not going to be hiring somebody for 6 months, year, you need time to analyze whether you even need a paralegal. There should be some expectation on here on when, at least what the administration thinks.
Agreed.
I think that's fair.
Let's agree on that, because I had actually asked for the, and maybe it got lost in translation, but I had sort of asked, and I probably should have said to Frank directly, it'd be good to have a comment line that says, you know, actively recruiting or reevaluating, don't plan to rehire, just a couple words, whatever, and we can add that going forward.
And then this is a first of, usually we show
Let's
that.
just agree that we can do that, because that's a good point, just so everyone knows the status, because listen, you know, there's 500 employees, you know, not everything's gonna be static. The administration is still in its first year, things are gonna change, always happens, but I think adding the status would be helpful. All right, any other questions on this vacancy report? Okay, so let's, all right, so that was item 8. Item 9, we heard earlier, we had moved that up, that was the investment income analysis. So we'll move to item 10 to hear a capital project status report. This is just, the backup for this item is on 189. I don't think we need to go through it. Does anyone have any questions? Typically, we just look at the status of this in ARPA during the quarterlies, but we did ARPA last meeting because we had a vote. So this is just a status report on stuff we've already approved. Are there any questions on this? Okay. Right, in that case, we can move on to item 11. Here an update on purchasing policy exceptions from the purchasing director. So just as background, before I hand this over to Adam, as background for the public, last November, this board voted to approve a revised purchasing policy for the town. That the policy was developed based on audit recommendations that arose during the DPW audit that was completed after the Phil Pile incident. And part of that revised policy requires that this board receive regular updates on activity that falls under certain categories of the policy that don't require public bidding. So our purchasing director has summarized that information. It's included in the posted backup beginning on page 197. I do, for the benefit of the public, I just want to make clear the items which are they're referred to as exceptions. These shouldn't, that doesn't mean they're violations of the policy. These are all categories of activity within the policy that are permissible with the appropriate approvals by management. But since they're categories of items that don't go through a public bidding process, the policy requires reporting to this board so there can be transparency around these items, and also to provide oversight that those policy provisions are being applied in an appropriate manner. Of course, if there were any actual violations of policy, they would also need to be reported. So with that, I will, again, this is on page 197 of the posted backup, and I will turn this over to our purchasing director, Adam Toolin. Hi, Adam. Thank you. Sorry, got you on so late. Welcome.
Oh, no, this was perfect. Thank you for having me. My wife is away on business, so it gave me an opportunity to get the kids asleep.
Great.
So yeah, I'm not sure how much you've been able to look through the backup, but this is my first time presenting this information to you guys. I kind of just gathered information and data that seemed interesting to me. We don't really have anything to compare it to yet. So, in future quarterly reports, we could probably, set up benchmarks, set up milestones based on, as the data goes on. But for now, I feel pretty positive about these numbers. We've issued close to $90 million in purchase orders in terms of encumbered funds across the town and school side of Munis so far this year. And, of that total, only 5% have come as a result of an exception. Again, as Lori defined there are these categories that are allowed. So the biggest piece is sole source, single source, sole source. And I think if you look at these numbers, again, we're at about $1 million on the school side in single source, and about $200,000 or $300,000 on the town side on sole source. I think that is probably going to prove to be pretty good. I say good meaning not excessive. So again, nothing to compare it to yet, but I feel positive about these numbers when I ran the report. So I don't know if anyone has any specific questions or if there's anything you'd like to see in future presentations. I can work on that.
Ms. Ruggiero?
Was there anything, like glaring that was like a true situation that, Lori, I know you've, Madam Chair, sorry. Is there anything that has come before the audit committee or anything that we should be aware of? That's worrying you?
That exception.
Yeah, nothing
Exceptions.
that came before the audit committee. I just, so as background, when we looked at this policy, we heard from, I think, Mr. Bremer at the time that there were, hundreds of these, that if they were to report this quarterly, there were just going to be hundreds of these every time, and it wouldn't make sense because there was such a volume of information. So the question was, why do we have hundreds of bid waivers? And the reality was they weren't really things that were, they were purchases that didn't really make sense to bid, or they weren't bid under the normal course, like legal services would be an example, or certain consulting services. So the purchasing policy was written to define those things and make sure that if there's a category of item that didn't typically go through a bid, there was a defined process around getting it approved. So that is what is here. As far as audit committee, I think we've had, we didn't have anything on bids. I think we've had some issues where, prices didn't agree to bids. So it was more after the fact, but it wasn't approvals of contracts, which is really what this is.
So when just looking at this at face value and see, you see 4.5 million exceptions, it seems like it might be alarming, but there's nothing really alarming there. Especially considering the amount of volume going through, it seems pretty small.
Yeah, the biggest issue was, and maybe Adam, you can speak to this, but the biggest, one of the things that I think was meant to be accomplished was on the Board of Ed side. So special ed program services, you'll have students that have immediate needs. There are limited resources. We have to hire the resources when we could get them. And under the old policy, it was going through, technically had to go through a lot of red tape in purchasing, which didn't make any sense because we were basically filling out paperwork after the fact because we had to hire. So, so within the new policy, that was set forth as a separate type of activity, subject to certain types of approvals that have to happen. And you can see that's the biggest item on here.
That makes total sense. You gotta move very quickly when that need arises. You can't anticipate that. You certainly can't waste time.
Right. And there's also, there was always a provision on emergency purchases. So if there's a flood in a building and you can't go out to bid to get a contractor, you just have to bring them in. That's always been a potential risk. It's happened in the past, but we were supposed to hear about it afterwards because that would be an item to talk about. There were no emergency purchases this year, Adam, but that would be something that, we would typically have to hear about. The single source, sole source, sometimes those could be consulting arrangements, legal, et cetera. So
To add some color, so I haven't, and I won't give up, I think, the prior administration delegated the, purchasing authority. So Adam and I are the purchasing authority, so he gets a form for single source filled out by the department head, or or Adam, works with them. And we treat it like it's a big deal, like, so he comes in and we go through it, we go through the rationale, and sometimes we follow up, and, and if usually it's like really clear. Sometimes there are nuances, so, one vendor is the only vendor that will take our sludge from, or that will process our sludge. There's one that in Connecticut. And so clearly you go with them, but there are multiple haulers that will pick up the sludge and take it to the person. But in certain circumstances, if they're full, they won't take the third party haulers, they'll only take their own haulers. So like there are some nuances to it, but we spent a lot of time on the exception. So I feel really good about the way this is going.
So overall, the policy that you guys worked, I know that there was a lot of work that went into this, with a lot of different members. Do you feel like it's really been effective? Because it seems like it's working pretty smoothly.
Well, before I only listened in on some of the meetings and they sounded like a nightmare.
It definitely sounds.
Hundreds of exceptions, and so I feel it's working really well now.
It sounds like you have
It's worked.
control there.
If I could just say, I think I definitely agree with that statement. I think, just off the top of my head, a couple things. The bid threshold was increased to a more, I'll say, a more modern level. So now, with a $25,000 limit, that has changed the way that we have to look at some of these items. With the creation of these categories of exceptions, that has helped out a lot. So yes, I think the new policy has really helped out here.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Matola?
Just give me, what's the time period? Is it from what do we approve?
This is the current.
But what time is this covered? Not just since July 1st, but what the time?
This spreadsheet, this backup I gave you is just for this fiscal year. I do have.
July 1st.
Yeah, if you'd like to see it, I do have backup. I don't have it ready right now, but I could get you backup that goes back to about December of last year, shortly after the policy went into effect.
So you can't compare anything from last July 1st because the policy changed, right? So
Right.
moving forward, we'll be able to look at year over year and so on and so forth. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, we had I don't know if it went into the public record, might have been through the purchasing policy committee. We did have a listing of bid waivers before that were, I remember there were, 800 or 900 of them, but they weren't in these categories. You looked at it and it was alarming, but that's because they weren't, you didn't know why. Was it a sole source? Was it a single source? Was it professional services? So, even if we tried to pull this information from prior years, I don't think we have a mechanism to compare it, so.
Good, thank you.
Okay, any other questions on this? All right. That was easy, Adam.
Thanks,
So
Adam.
Adam, the one thing I will say is you promised to come back to us at some point and let us know if there were things in the policy that were not working and if the board, you recommended any changes. So we'll have to, we need to follow up and get you on the appropriate agenda, definitely before this policy's a year old, so.
Okay.
All right, thank
I'll
you
be
very
ready.
much.
Thank you, guys. Thank you all.
Thank you so much. All right, so we'll move on to item 12. Here, consider and act on any communications. Do you have any communications? All right. Item 13, take a motion to adjourn. Mr. Shirley, second by Mr. Zero. Okay, in favor? Adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.